Welcome to the Open Apple podcast, where we celebrate the Apple II. Whether you're a long-time user, a nostalgic visitor, or a newcomer to the community, join us as we share news and memories of Steve Wozniak's most famous personal computer.
Hello and welcome to Open Apple. This is episode 52 for October. See, I already messed it up. 2015. See, for the listeners, Mike and I just had this 5-minute conversation about which episode this was and what month it was for, and we had it all figured out, and then I choked. So this is, in fact, episode 52 for October 2015. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Quinn. I'm your co-host, let's say co-host A, and co-host B is Mike McGinnis. How you doing, Mike?
I'm here, Quinn. How are you?
I could just hear. Well, all right, that's enough sometimes.
Well, you know it's off to a rough start when we can't even remember what month this is. So.
Yeah, it's going to be that kind of show, folks. So
I sure hope not, because
buckle up.
We got some interesting stuff to talk about.
We do, actually. So we can kind of give people a taste of what's to come here. So Mike and I have talked for a while now about doing a dedicated GEOS episode. And so this is that episode. We've got a really awesome GEOS-themed interview coming up. And we're going to talk about GEOS in some more detail. We'll still have some news and some usual stuff, but GEOS is awesome and deserves its own show. So this is going to be that.
So have you seen and or read The Martian?
I have read it. I loved it, and I'm planning to see it today, in fact.
It's a fun movie. I saw it last weekend. Although I don't know if we've talked about this on the show or not. My sister is an executive at the United Launch Alliance, ULA. They're a competitor for SpaceX, and she is a rocket scientist. So when you make rocket science jokes, that's she's talking about. She's actually, I am a rocket scientist. So, but when you go see a movie like this with her, you're going to get a lot of commentary, and so I advise leaving your scientist friends at home for this.
That must have been I was like going to see Twister with a meteorologist.
Yes, exactly.
The whole time they're like, but that's not how that works.
Right. Yep. So I'll spare you guys all the commentary and stuff that we had going back and forth during the movie. But there was a Zork 2 and a Leather Goddesses of Phobos reference in the movie. It's pretty brief. I guess one of the astronauts that goes up with Matt Damon is a sort of a retro type person and collects all the stuff. And she had copies of those games on her computer. Now they show a brief screenshot there's a brief shot of him looking at her laptop, and you see the IBM Leather Goddesses logo on the screen, although it's cropped in such a way that you can see the title of the game, but you don't see the scantily clad women directly below it with standing next to the gas pump.
Huh. Wow. Good catch, Mike. That's fantastic. Yeah, Zork reference, like it's sort of plausible, but Leather Goddesses of Phobos, that's a more obscure game for hardcore Infocom fans. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that one came out much later on in the Infocom run, and I'm sure it didn't probably sell as well, because I think at that point, I don't know if they were Activision property at that point, but I know they weren't the company they once were.
Yeah, I have fond memories of LGOP, as they say. That was the one that came with the scratch and sniff card. And,
that's the one.
Yeah, and they were all like awful smells. And they had an awesome advertisement that they ran of this guy sniffing them and making a terrible face because they were awful.
Feelies.
Yeah, the Feelies, the golden age of Feelies. So let's see. Well, let's move on here a bit. We've gotten a lot of feedback about the length of the show, actually, and it's right now it's just about an even split between people who say they like the longer shows. As longtime listeners know, we've been trending closer into the 2 to 3 hour range lately, and we've had a lot of feedback saying people want a shorter show. So, it's a tough call because we want to make the show we want to make, but we also want to make something that people want to listen to. So we're going to try splitting the difference a little bit. We're going to try to tighten things up a little bit. We may alternate some of our segments on alternate months, and maybe try to focus our content a little bit tighter on strictly Apple II stuff. So hopefully that will work for people. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to changing up the format a little bit. Hopefully we will. It's not that this is a bad thing, but it's become this. The news section especially has become sort of a roll call of Apple II mentions on the interwebs, and I think that's sort of cutting into maybe some better, deeper discussion that we could have. Like if we focused on a fewer number of items, we could have some good discussion rather than just having to read, this check out this article, check out this is for sale, because that's sort of more for, I think, the news sites like A2 Central and Call Apple, where they can, post a title and a short blurb and then move on to the next one. Whereas I kind of like having these discussions, especially, you're smart, I'm sort of smart, and we have a lot of smart Apple II people on the show. And so it's great when we can take time and really talk about some of these items, which lately I felt like we can't do because we're just so crammed for time, and we got to even if we're pushing it, it's going to be 3 hours and come on, let's just get through this. And I think that leads to burnout and less interest. And so, we're going to try a few things. And of course you can send us feedback and let us know how we're doing.
I think the value that we can bring to the community is the more in-depth conversation about fewer things. So that's what we're going to try to refocus ourselves on. And speaking of bringing value to the community, you can bring value to our community by supporting us on Patreon. We've been talking about this in the last couple of months. We've set up a Patreon for the show because as our readership grows, our hosting costs go up, and they're actually quite substantial. So if you wanted to pitch in a couple of bucks to help us out, that would really be appreciated. You can visit us on patreon.com/openapple, and we'll have a link to that, of course, in the show notes. And we got some email about the recent Patreon security breach. They had some data stolen from their servers, and so I thought we would just quickly talk about that. The nature of the breach was actually such that what they actually got was our data, not yours. So people who have Patreon accounts set up, that data is actually what was stolen, not the patrons' data. And, none of your financial information or anything like that is actually stored on Patreon servers. So none of that was taken. And everything that was taken is all 2048-bit RSA encrypted. So nobody short of the NSA is going to be cracking that open anyway. So rest assured, your data with Patreon is safe. And we hope that you'll support us. Patreon, honestly, it's a fantastic service. There's nobody doing this kind of thing quite as well as they are. So we really hope that you will support us through them.
Now, I had an email from someone who was interested in donating, but they only want to do like a one-time donation. Is Patreon set up for that, or should they be donating? If they want to do that way, should that come through just like a PayPal account? What do you think there?
Yeah, Patreon is not really set up for one-time donations. If people want to do PayPal donations, that would be another option that we could set up. PayPal has actually stopped supporting donations officially. I guess there's some tax or legal implications there, but what a lot of people do is you set up a fake good that you claim to be purchasing from people. So I have that set up on my blog, for example, for those people that prefer to just do an occasional one-time thing. So we could look into setting that up as well. We appreciate the thought either way. All right, well, Mike, should we roll into our awesome interview?
Yeah, let's talk to people.
Hi, I'm Paul Ludis, author of Apple Writer. You're listening to the Open Apple Podcast.
All right, so sitting down with us today is Robert Bowdidge, and hopefully later, Andrew Wilson, perhaps best known to Apple II users as the authors of GEOS for the Apple II, as we've been discussing on this month's show. So we're happy to have Robert here to start. How you doing, Robert?
Great, thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being on the show. I think so. Mike and I are both huge GEOS fans, and I think this is a lot of fun for us to be able to talk to the people that wrote it. So, can you talk a little bit about how you found yourself at Berkeley Softworks, and how GEOS ended up on the Apple II, having started as a Commodore staple?
Sure. So first I can say something about how we got started, which is that you guys got really lucky because you get to talk with the interns. The three of us who started the project, who was Andrew Wilson, Brian Chin, and me, were all Berkeley undergrads who had signed up for the co-op experience, which is that you take a quarter off or a semester off and you go work for a company and you get to learn all about what real software development is like. And Berkeley Softworks had been a company that was founded by a bunch of Berkeley grads. And they had a habit of hiring smart undergrads that they found through the co-op program. They'd have them work for Berkeley Softworks for 6 months. And then if it seemed to work out, then they'd either keep you on sort of part-time during school, or they knew that they were going to grab you when you graduated. And so the five of us who started that summer, which I guess was summer of '86, got some choices for projects, and there were a couple things that they were thinking about. And one of them was doing a version of BASIC that was going to be a graphical programming language. And there was a second project, which I don't remember what it was. And then there was this idea of, hey, why don't we take this thing that we already have, GEOS, and we're going to move it over to the Apple II. And the three of you will do it. We had two managers at different points. At first, Eric Del Sesto, who was who'd been with the company since the start, and he's worth his own little story. And Eric actually got us started and showed us how to deal with Berkeley Softworks programming environment and getting us into the product. And then later on, Clayton Jung was actually our manager, and I remember him as a really cool guy who was having fun trying to keep us interns actually going on a real product here. And so that's the basic story. The three of us walk in, we get thrown on let's go make a real thing. And over the next year, we actually got this thing shipped. It was great fun.
Now, you mentioned the Berkeley programming environment just in general. What was that like?
So that was one of the really special things about Berkeley Softworks is that my background was actually as a TRS-80 user back in the day. That was what I had as yes. It really I think it sort of is going into enemy territory when I suddenly was working on Commodore 64s and Apple IIs. But Berkeley Softworks was interesting because they actually did all their stuff with cross development, that they didn't actually develop on the raw machines. Instead, they had some in-circuit emulators that would actually plug in place of the CPU. And we did all of our coding up on a Unix mini computer. I don't remember which brand, but they had something off in one of the closets. And you would actually do all your editing in VI or Emacs. You would compile it up there or assemble it up there because we were doing 6502 assembly. Ship it down to the in-circuit emulator. It would actually load it in and run it. And then you had the advantage of being able to do things like hardware breakpoints of tell me when I write to this memory, which was great for memory smashers. The in-circuit emulators, and this made us really productive. It was a wonderful experience over microcomputers of the day because suddenly we could actually do all this development really quickly, that we could just be coding as fast as we can. We could have really large files. We could do the assembly really quick. We didn't have to worry about swapping floppies. It all just magically happened. And the in-circuit emulator gave us all these really cool debugging features. And this really was the competitive advantage, I think, that Berkeley Softworks had over other companies because we had such an easy time doing development compared to everybody else.
Well, that's actually really interesting. I had no idea that they were doing that. That's we talk a lot about on this show about the sort of the power of modern cross development. There's a lot of Apple II development going on today, and it's so much more efficient than it used to be because, of course, we can do all of our development on modern platforms, modern tools, and then just either run it in emulation or send it over the serial to the hardware for testing. So that's cool. They had actually basically constructed that same environment way back in '86.
Well, and actually that, I think, came out of sort of where the company had come from. That Berkeley Softworks was actually a bunch of guys who'd been at Imagic, the video game company that was doing Atari 2600 cartridges back in the day. And some of them had actually come from, had originally been at Mattel working on Intellivision. So Brian Daugherty, Eric Del Sesto, a few of the others had actually been at Mattel back in the day and had done some of the initial games. And then they'd moved over to Imagic. When some of the folks from Atari broke off to form that company and decided they were going to make all their money selling Atari cartridges. And so everybody grew up who came from the Imagic side with this idea that we're going to do everything as cross-development because you can't actually develop on an Atari 2600. As well as being really efficient because they were used to the days of all we have is 256 bytes of memory. All we have is 4K of space for the machine code. And so a lot of the old timers were really, really, really good. And so the story of Berkeley Softworks is that Imagic was doing really good in the early 80s. And supposedly they were going to go public, and for some reason the underwriter or somebody got sick, and they had to delay the offering by 6 months. And right before they were going to make the company go public, and everybody was going to make all this money, and they were going to be able to buy Ferraris and stuff, suddenly Atari announces, hey, we're having a little problem selling video games because the market's glutted. And this was, I don't know, probably late 83 or something. I don't know for sure. That was high school for me. And so suddenly the company sort of, they hold back. They say, well, we'll hold out waiting for the market to improve. And the 2600 market didn't improve. And the company went under and everybody fled to the four winds. And the Berkeley Softworks guys took all that knowledge of working in emulators and went over to trying to do custom stuff because they didn't want to deal with venture capital anymore. They wanted to own the company themselves. And this is all the stories I heard, so I'm probably getting it wrong, but it's a good story anyway. And so they supposedly, the GEOS actually came out of, they'd started this little company. They were going to do their own projects, and they had this idea of doing a laptop computer or a computer for inside a plane that was going to be something that would fit in the tray table and that you could actually read, play little games and that sort of thing. And the story I'd heard was that it was being sponsored by somebody who was a battery manufacturer that thought this would be a good way to sell batteries. And so they developed the prototype, and that's where they did the in-circuit emulator. And the company that was sponsoring this suddenly realized how much it was going to cost to actually turn this into a real product and backed out. And that was where they'd sort of gotten this experience of maybe we can take this thing that we've already been doing for a computer tray table computer and put it into a real computer. Perhaps we can do something with all those Commodore 64s that are sitting around in people's closets because their kids were like, I don't want to play with this. I want to play with my 2600 or my 5200 or my Atari 7800 or whatever. And that's
a lot of effort to sell batteries.
Yes, but I mean that was sort of the progression of doing video games and then going to making this custom computer and then using all that knowledge to be able to do microcomputer software better.
That's very cool. So can you talk a little bit about, what was that like for you to start at this company, as an intern, still in school, TRS-80 user, and to get handed an Apple II to port this, extremely sophisticated and complex piece of software? What was that like? What was that, how was that ramp-up process, and what were some of the challenges that you guys were facing?
I just remember it being great fun because we went from, being students, I'd had a couple of summer jobs, doing some retail, and then I'd worked for a company doing basic programming on some simulations for a big construction company that wanted to simulate dump truck productivity, how fast they could dump dirt and how fast they could take things up a road. And so suddenly the three of us are there. We're actually developing real software. It's a familiar environment. It's fun. And there wasn't a lot of, I remember some pressure, but I don't remember a lot because they weren't quite sure where it was going to go to. But I remember a lot of, we were trying to prove ourselves and putting in a fair number of, doing typical Silicon Valley, we're going to stay late, we'll go get food, we'll come back. I remember a lot of just sort of diving in and not really knowing the impact of what we were doing. So one of the stories I love to tell to my interns whenever I get an intern these days is that when we started at Berkeley Softworks, the first job was, okay, build your own desks. We got some tables here from Scandinavian Designs. And then we get a VT100 terminal. Actually, it's a WISE terminal, but we basically got our own terminal there that we could actually program on. Connecting up to the mini computer, we got our Apple II and our emulator, and we start looking at the source code. And we didn't know anything about source control in those days, and so we just sort of copied everything over to a new directory. And I remember the first day I was looking through and looking at the header files, and the first header file I see says define false 0, define true 255. And I look at that and I'm like, that's not right. On Unix, it's always 1. And so I went and I just changed it. And nobody else was really looking at this. We're not doing code reviews or anything how we do it these days. And it's not causing any problem. It's our code. What's the problem? And about a year and a half later, after Apple II GEOS is shipped, and I was working on GeoCalc, suddenly one of the guys who's doing documentation for the programming environment comes over. He's like, "Hey, Robert, can you give us some ideas of what's going on here? We noticed that in the basic headers for the basic defines on the Commodore, the true's defined to be 255 and false, and on the Apple II, true's defined to be 1. What's going on there?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I think I changed that on the first day on the project." And it hadn't bitten us for a year and a half, but when they were trying to move GeoCalc or one of the other programs over, one of the old timers who'd been doing Atari 2600 programming had realized that one of the easier ways to test for truth was, or to test if something was false, was rather than testing against 0, he was actually, I think, decrementing and looking for a carry or something like that. And the code wasn't working. And he suddenly realized that this cool trick he'd been doing wasn't quite right. And I learned my lesson about, okay, don't change things because there's always unknown dependencies that you might have forgotten about.
Now, after that first day of kind of reviewing the Commodore code, how heavily did you rely on that as moving forward? Was it just was this a straight port from Commodore, or did you guys mostly build from the ground up when you did the Apple version?
It was mostly a straight port. So what I remember was that the way we broke it up was that I ended up doing sort of the low-level operating system stuff. Brian was doing, I think, text handling, and Andrew was handling graphics. And so each of us was dealing with the oddities in that. So Andrew was having to worry a lot about Apple II style graphics and how to deal with color and how to deal with the bitmap for the screen and the like. I remember my biggest problem was that we realized it wasn't going to quite fit in 64K of memory because of the memory map for the Apple II, and I don't remember the details. And we decided that what we'd do is we'd depend on having the 128K option, which was done basically with bank swapping, that you could basically say that 0 to 200 and D0 to FF was one area, and then the rest was a separate area, and there were some there was a memory location and IO port you could hit to actually change this. I'm sure I'm getting this wrong. I apologize to all the Apple folks who actually remember this stuff, unlike me.
That's actually right. Yep.
and so, one of my clever things was how to make it so that I could actually have some of the library code hidden off in these other banks. And so I remember spending way too much time on this clever idea where you would basically do a jump and then to a jump table. And if the jump table contained that library function in the same bank, it would just jump right off. Otherwise, it would jump to some little helper routine that would flip the banks and then take you back. And at that point, the jump table was correct and you go on. And this, I thought, was the most clever thing I'd ever done. I had a great time doing this. And I remember it took forever. I was having a hard time trying to get things started just because of all the fun of how do you debug this when you're messing up memory. And I remember at some point, I guess everyone else got a little worried, and some lunchtime decided to go look at my code. And I remember being very hurt when I found out about this and learned the fun of actually having a thick skin in this industry. And the other things I remember was, minor things like dealing with the change in screen resolution. So going from, I guess the Commodores must have been 256 pixels wide. And I think the Apple II was 320. And once again, I apologize if I get this wrong. And I remember one of the projects I did late one night was stretching the bitmap for the banner across the top of GeoWrite to be able to say, make this bold, make this italics, just because suddenly that wouldn't fit. And so that required somebody to do it. And so the fun of small companies is you get to do everything. It's not like you have to send it off to the UX designer to adjust it.
So when you were working there, did you have a sense of the scale of what was being built there? I mean, the thing I think that stands out about GEOS is that it was this thing that shouldn't have existed. I mean, it really was kind of, Macintosh and, Amiga level GUI performance and complexity and sophistication on, hardware that no one I think would have predicted could do such things. And I think it really helped extend, the lifetime of the Commodore and Apple II platforms probably much longer than they would have had otherwise, because of the power of, desktop publishing that it gave to this low-end line of computers. So did you have that sense when you were working there that people knew they were doing that, or was it just a case of they felt it was a niche they were filling?
It was a conscious decision on their part that I really got the sense of, like I said before, that they realized that there were all these Commodore 64s that had been thrown in the back of closets by kids because the games weren't up to the video game consoles that their friends had. And there was this whole idea of pulling those out and making something that would please that market. Of all these people across America who had Commodore 64s and had not had a good use for them, that was really their focus. And when I went over to where tech support was, there was a room that had all the folks who handled phone support and email with all the classic props that a tech support group needs, which is like Nerf guns and toys and anything to cut the stress. They'd have all these stories of talking to, somebody in the middle of Pennsylvania or talking to somebody out in the desert in Nevada who's doing really cool things and is just so happy because they've got a computer that's actually doing wonderful things for them that they thought they wouldn't be able to do without spending $1,000 or $2,000 or, well, $2,400 for a Mac in those days. I remember one of the phone calls they really loved was they were talking with this guy about some problem he was having on the Commodore 64 version, and suddenly there's this big roar, and they're like, "What was that?" And he's like, "Oh, that was a F-16, some jet." And they're like, "Why did you have one of those going by?" And he's like, "Well, I'm on an aircraft carrier." And the idea that somebody on an aircraft carrier had the Commodore 64 version was really cool. And I think for us, we just saw that they were able to do this on a Commodore 64. So how hard could it be to do this on an Apple II? I remember when we went off to CES, they actually sent us away for a day so that we could actually get to be on the show floor and actually see them trying to sell this to little computer stores across the U.S. Of course, we get our chance to run around because that's part of the reason to send us there, because it's kind of fun. And Apple had a booth and they were showing off HyperCard. And I remember we were all looking at HyperCard and saying, "Oh, wow, this is really cool. It's got a little programming language. You can do cool things. We should implement this for GEOS, because how hard could it be? We've already basically got the Mac on a Commodore 64 and an Apple II. Doing HyperCard's got to be, just a little bit more work." And that was how cocky we were at the time, that we assumed that that if it was on the Mac, we could probably do this. And a couple of the other folks were like, "I think there's a lot of stuff in there you don't really understand." So yeah, we had no fear. We had no sense that this was going to be impossible. We just did it.
And how was it? Was it actually as difficult as they'd said, or was it as easy as you guys thought it would be?
It was. I think that they assumed it would not be too hard. I would really, now that I've actually been in the industry and I've actually shipped software a bunch of times, I'd really love to talk with some of the folks at the company and actually hear what was going on, because I suspect that there were some interesting discussions about, okay, we're going to blow X $100,000 on 3 interns to do this, and then we're going to spend a huge amount trying to advertise this, and what the heck are we thinking? Because it was breaking into a completely different market. That for Commodore 64, it seems really much more straightforward. We know there are these computers out there. It's going to be easy to get people interested because they don't have any other options. Whereas with Apple, you had other options. There was other software. It was a little more sophisticated set of users. And so I suspect that marketing-wise, it was probably a much more interesting project. But for us, it was just, we can do this and let's go hack it and we'll get it done.
Yeah, the Apple market is interesting that way also, because it's the Commodore version of GEOS is not a threat really to the Mac, because it's really more of a toy. But I think that the Apple II version of it was a direct threat to the Mac, because I think certainly for me personally, sort of delayed upgrading to a Mac much longer, just because it allowed me to do sort of 85% of what I wanted a Mac to do. So I think in that regard, maybe Apple probably saw it as a bit more of a threat.
Well, they didn't see us as that much of a threat, because they actually did give us some prototypes. So when I think the Apple IIc Plus came out, one of our conference rooms had one bolted down with a secret code name that we were told, and we were very explicitly told, don't repeat this code name because Apple gives different code names to different companies so they can see where the leak comes from.
Oh.
So Apple thought enough of us to seat us with one of those. And I don't know enough about how DTS works to know why they did that, but
that's cool. That's really interesting.
Well, I could also imagine you know all the stories you hear about what life was like in the Macintosh division was that there was this big challenge within Apple about whether Mac or the Apple II was going to be was what to focus on. And so I could imagine the Apple II division being, hey, they're going to keep us going. This is great.
Yeah, there was definitely that was the key turning point for the company. There was a real identity crisis going on there. There was the status quo of the two, and the Steve Jobs pirate rebel group of the Mac. And I think sort of looking back on it now, we get the sense that everybody kind of knew that the Mac was the future, but the Apple II was keeping the lights on, and so they were probably happy to have anything that would help extend the life of that platform long enough for Jobs and crew to finish whatever they were doing in that other building. But it's funny you mentioned the IIc Plus, because we've actually talked about on the show here how the IIc Plus is kind of the perfect GEOS machine, with the accelerator and the mouse and everything. GEOS runs really great on it, and the fact that you can install, all of your major applications on a single floppy and still have room for your documents and everything. It's very cool.
The part I think I liked best about it was that it didn't require the dongle. So I was pulling out my copy of GEOS just now, and in both the GeoCalc and in the original GEOS box, there's the little envelope with the IRQ dongle. There was a little board that plugged into one of the slots, and all it did was route from the clock over to the interrupt, so that we actually had interrupts, because you didn't get that in standard in the standard Mac or Apple OS. And that was really interesting, because at first we were going to depend on having, say, a mouse card, which would give you that for free. And then we realized that was going to limit the number of people that would actually buy this. And so I remember a meeting in somebody's cube where we're talking about, oh, well, we're going to need some sort of a way of doing this. And, oh, how expensive is this going to be? We don't know if this is possible. And Doug Fultz, one of the longtime Berkeley Softworks folks, was like, oh, no, that's not hard. And immediately sketches out minimal digital logic and starts arguing about how to get the chip count down. All the stuff that Wozniak was famous for the disk drive, but in a much smaller scale. And I just remember looking over at that going, wow, look at what he can do. Someday I'll be able to do that too. And so we had a little, who knows how much that cost, probably $1 or something, a little board to give us the interrupts so that we could actually make the machine very responsive and be able to do the software well. It was kind of a cute trick.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things to talk to younger programmers today about, is the fact that there was no source of interrupts on the Apple II that you could use pre Apple IIc. There was no vertical blank interrupt, and I think it's sort of a funny oversight. Even just a couple of years later, you wouldn't think of building a computer without that, but it definitely makes for some big challenges in audio and mouse and other similar areas on the earlier IIs.
So was that hardware dongle the only version of copy, or the only type of copy protection that was used on Apple GEOS?
As far as I know.
I remember, like, if you go and download the freeware version of it now, there's actually a file called About Piracy, and it talks about why we didn't copy protect this, and how you should be a good person and not steal our software.
And that I don't remember enough about. I suspect we didn't. I seem to remember that there might have been some on the Commodore 64 version, that they were doing some clever things with the disk drive and stuff, which certainly helped. But it was really interesting, because I remember Andrew and Brian, when they first got on the project, they were both Apple II folks, and they were like, telling each other their hacker names and how they communicated on the boards. And suddenly we were going from being the teenagers who were doing very nasty things with software to copying things, at least. Going from that to suddenly having our work be the thing that was being sold.
Yeah, it's funny how that can change your attitude about, you start to feel like you're biting the hand that feeds you a little bit.
Or, well, I don't think it hit us that seriously, but I think it certainly gives a better idea of, okay, the software is actually paying for these nice offices and paying for this nice comfy chair. This was in the days before having snacks at any hour.
Now, you mentioned going to CES and seeing the sales team at work. Did you have any sense of how sales were going? Because for the Apple II, especially 86, 87 was pretty late in the life cycle of that computer.
So I don't know for sure. What I do know is that, we must have been shipping it in January of 07, I guess. So we must have gotten it done pretty quickly there. So I went back to school at the beginning of January. I did a full semester, did a digital design class where we had to actually design our own 6502, which turned out to be much harder than I thought. I remember that trying to work for Berkeley Softworks and do classwork at the same time was actually a bit of a pain. And my grades reflected it. And so the next semester, so summer or fall of 88, I guess, fall of 87, I was actively trying to not spend as much time. I did some of the work on GeoCalc and did the sideways printing feature and did a bunch of other stuff with printing. And at some point, I'd not gone into the office for several days because I was focusing on classes because I was being a good student. And as I'm walking across campus, I ran into one of the other interns, and we'd all been working part-time since we'd finished. And he's like, "Hey, were you at the all-hands meeting?" I'm like, "What all-hands meeting?" He's like, "Oh, there was an all-hands meeting. We've just done layoffs because the Apple II product wasn't selling so good, and so we've been laid off." So what I remember from that was that the Apple II stuff wasn't selling as well as they thought. It had been, I don't know if it had been a big bet or not, but they'd realized that some of their thoughts about doing something equivalent for low-end PCs would be a really good idea. So basically, they cut back the company. They started ramping down on the idea of at least Apple. I don't know about Commodore 64. And slowly people started going back on. But I was, at that point, I ended up, I'd had my fun and wanted to focus on graduating. And so I think the company did have some hard times there. But PC GEOS turned out well, and GeoWorks stayed around for quite a while after that.
So you mentioned GeoCalc there. So there, if you install, we'll link in the show notes to a complete GEOS package that our listeners can install and play with. And there's a demo on there, sort of a demo movie of GeoCalc. But I was actually not able to find any evidence of it ever having shipped. Did that product actually go out, on the Apple II?
I'd be almost certain it did. I certainly have a boxed copy, and I can't imagine we would have made that without. So yes, so the GeoCalc box actually has a full copy of GEOS, I assume, or at least it has the OS. Maybe it doesn't actually have the GeoWrite and GeoDraw. I guess I need to find an Apple II to see if it'll actually work. And it came with the dongle too.
As far as I've been able to tell, there was a couple of different packages. The base one that had GeoWrite and GeoPaint, and then there was a version that came with a mouse, and then there was a version that came with the interrupt generator card if you were running on a 2E without a mouse. So that seems to be sort of, and then GeoPublish came out. It seems like as a separate package, but I haven't been able to find any evidence of GeoCalc. So that's really interesting that it definitely exists.
It might just have come out too soon before they decided not to do it. I remember the version with the mouse. I think that's the one my parents have, because I think I gave them a copy of that. I've got the original Apple GEOS, which was to bring back lots of reminiscing from folks as old as me. It's one of those bits of software where they actually gave you the manual in a 3-ring binder. It's a custom 3-ring binder, but it's still in a 3-ring binder. And I just remember looking at that just now saying, wow, they didn't even need to bind it. They just sort of put it in a 3-ring binder.
Yeah, I've still got my 3-ring binder as well, and I'm actually a big fan of it because it was very, very exciting to get that at the time, because it was the kind of thing that like IBM did with their 360 manuals and things like that. Like it was this big it was like this professional sort of industrial way to package documentation so that you could rearrange the pages and add new pages as you got new software and so on. So that to me was like, I felt like I was big time for having that on my shelf. That was I always thought really cool. And then of course nothing else ever really ended up coming out, so I never got to add any pages to my binder, but I liked the idea that I could.
Yeah, I don't know why they did it. I was just assuming that it was cheaper to do it that way and the lead time was smaller than trying to get it bound. But that might be silly.
Yeah, that's probably true too, actually, yeah. Do you have an Apple II now? Do you still have one, or have you ever had one?
No, I've never actually had an Apple II. So I had a TRS-80, Model 3. So I never had the fun of actually using a pencil eraser on the tin contacts. Yeah. Actually, I think it's sort of interesting that right before I'd done the internship, I think, was when Berkeley had started getting Sun workstations. So they had a lab there that had 26 Sun 350s, which were the pizza box computers, diskless, 68 OXO processor, running Unix, bitmap, huge bitmap display. And to some extent, I looked at that and I said, this is the coolest thing ever. Why would I ever want anything else? I can have Unix. I've got this really cool computer. I've got a big screen. And so at that point, the world of mini computers sort of lost interest for me. And my only aim in life was to get something with a really big monitor. And so I'd gotten a Mac SE when I went to grad school, and kept thinking about getting one of those $1,000 20-inch monitors, and never did. And when I was at IBM, I found a dead Sun 350 that somebody had been using, that I was like, hey, can I bring that home? And I remember doing installs and having fun with that, and never really did anything with it. But yeah, never really looked back at the PC world. If I was going to do anything, I'd probably go for something like like one of the Sol 20s. Those were one of the early late 70s computers with the wood sides, or actually the first thing I ever really played with seriously, which was a MSI 8080 with the switches on the front, the computer from War Games.
War Games computer, yes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you may start a new movement of workstation retro computing in a few years. Get together when play with SPARC stations and SGIs.
Yeah, there's already those folks, and unfortunately, retro computing takes an awful lot of space, and the garage is already full.
Yeah, especially that graphics workstation type of retro computing. I used to work at SGI back in the early 90s, and those monitors were 60 pounds.
Yes, the world of flat screens is so boring.
Yeah, it is indeed. But you do have, you said, a boxed copy of GeoCalc for the Apple II?
Yes. The collectible one now that I realize.
Yeah, we should try and figure out how to get that imaged from you. It's a shame you don't have an Apple II and we could walk you through the process, but we'll have to find some other way. I guess if you've got it, one of our listeners must have it. We'll try and track it down. It's one of the few holes, I think, in the Asimov archive is GeoCalc.
Wow.
Yeah, that sort of brings up another point that, especially if you go out there today, there's a huge archive of add-ons that people have written for the Commodore version of GEOS, and yet there's really not much at all for the Apple side of the house. Why do you think that is?
As somebody who is not actually part of sort of the Apple II community, I think I'd have a hard time with that.
Okay.
I've heard some of the reasons. I was listening to the podcast with the Beagle Brothers programmers a few weeks ago, and I remember them commenting about doing all the add-ons. And it sounds like there was a much bigger ecosystem, and there were a lot of other alternatives in the Apple world.
Yeah, I think AppleWorks was sort of had the fan base that GEOS did on the Commodore. I think GEOS was certainly a little more niche on the Apple. So I wonder, sort of related to that, digging through, sort of researching GEOS for this show, there's so much more information available now than there was at the time about this stuff, and it seems like that there was intention to provide like an SDK and this sort of GeoProgrammer environment for developing GEOS applications, and it certainly existed on the Commodore, and there's references to it on the Apple, to the Apple version in the documentation. But again, it's another product I can't find any evidence ever actually existing aside from offhand references in documents. Is that something, just this GeoProgrammer environment, that did it exist or not?
I don't think it ever went to the Apple II. So the story I had about changing True and them finding out about it a year later, that was when they were actually doing the SDK manual. And I think I photocopied that from a friend long ago.
Okay.
But I think that was the point that they started doing this and thinking that they could build an ecosystem and have other people developing. And it was all sort of an interesting question about how people would do that, because, yeah, we were doing some very clever things with 6502 assembly. We had the idea of virtual registers in page 0, so that you were actually coding when you developed for GEOS by talking about transferring 16-bit values between these 16-bit registers. And so some of that cleverness, I think, would still work on a desktop machine. But like I said, I think one of the big advantages that Berkeley Softworks had was that whole idea of cross-assembling and doing all the development up on the Unix box. And so I could imagine that even with GeoProgrammer, that there probably still would never have been the great products.
Yeah, it's interesting reading the documentation. It seems clear they were really trying to create a sort of a universal platform between the two machines, and they did a lot of really clever looking things. There's a consistent sprite API, for example, that works on Commodore or Apple II or Commodore 128, whether or not you have hardware sprites. It's the same API, and it has this virtual sprite system for the Apple II, which I thought was really, really clever. So yeah, the I think quality of the software engineering that's in it really shows through. Even as a user, I mean, you see it in how much quicker GEOS boots than any kind of competing product. It's funny, when I did finally upgrade my 2E to a 2GS, it was a bit of a letdown from GEOS in many ways, because the file system was much slower and much more complex. You can boot GEOS a dozen times in the time it takes GSOS to get running at a third of the clock speed. So I think that's a tribute to the engineering that's in it.
And some of that I think was us, and some of that I think was the folks who did the original Commodore 64 version, who were definitely great programmers. It's interesting. I hadn't thought about the sprite stuff, and that hadn't been a part of the code I'd looked at. And I assumed that was something that we already had sort of that support underneath, and it was easier to actually just emulate it on the Apple II rather than have to rewrite all that code. And so that was probably Andrew Wilson's work. And so it sounds like he did some cool stuff.
Yeah, hopefully we can track him down. One of the biggest challenges, I imagine, on porting it to the Apple II was dealing with the double high-res graphics screen on the Apple II, which, while giving you a lot of pixels, which is great for a GUI, it's also obscenely complicated to program. Every other column of pixels is in a separate memory bank, and you have to flip the banks back and forth just to draw a horizontal line. And it's sheer madness, the way that memory is laid out.
I suspect that that's something that once you figured out the rough idea, that it wasn't too bad. I could imagine the spriting stuff might have been more complex, just because I could imagine a lot of code to try to reproduce all the functionality and also figure out what functionality not to bring over.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, a lot of it, once you've abstracted it away, with some clever low-level stuff, then it's kind of a solved problem at that point. But yeah, I can imagine that first few weeks of working on that would be quite a challenge.
Yeah, you definitely start losing hair that way. I mean, for me, I think that was the equivalent of the sideways printing that when we were trying to figure out what features to put into GeoCalc. I kept saying, somebody brought over Sideways, which was a PC add-on, so that you could actually print large spreadsheets sideways. And I was like, hey, we could do this. And everybody else was like, oh, no, that's really complicated. And how are you going to do that? And I said, well, we've already got this idea of doing virtual rows to send to the printer. We just have to do that with everything rotated. And it turned out not to be that nasty a bit of code. And what I remember of that printing code was that I spent a heck of a lot more time just trying to test on every printer and make sure that everything was working back in the days before unit testing. That was a heck of a lot more complicated than it was to actually do the sideways code, if I remember.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to ask about the printer drivers and how those were structured. One of the things that really set GEOS apart, I think, is how the printing on it just kind of worked. A lot of us had weird Japanese knockoffs of Epson printers with our Apple IIs that didn't necessarily always work with every piece of software. But GEOS, I distinctly remember, it just recognized my printer and worked in every application, which I'd never seen happen before. So do you remember how that was structured and how they managed to achieve that?
So some of that already had come from the Commodore 64 version. So I remember that the device drivers had a relatively straightforward way of saying, okay, here's how many pins we have, here's how many rows we have across the page, here are the various control characters to be able to kick things into graphics mode and not. So they already had the abstractions. so that when I went to the Apple II, I made some changes, but not a huge amount. I remember I tried adding a bunch of clever things to the Apple II version because I could. We can argue about whether that was the right thing or whether that caused problems as I made the two diverge. But yeah, I think the idea of just having a constant interface and being able to throw these things off on a disk somewhere so you only brought in the ones you need was the big deal.
Yeah, the driver structure of it from a user's perspective was really quite elegant. You just had to have a couple of files sitting in your system folder, and then everything would just work. There was even a little wizard that would walk you through, ask you questions about what kind of hardware you had and would configure your system folder for you, which is something that PCs didn't do until many, many years later, which always impressed me as well.
I don't even remember that, so somebody must have done it. I don't remember who did it. Now I want to go look at the SDK manual and see about all the details on the printer drivers.
Is that an official document, or is that?
Yeah, I think so. I could, if you wanted me to go run off into the garage, I can probably go find it somewhere. No, this was the official SDK. I don't know if it had anything on printers, but with luck.
Yeah, we'll link to that document in the show notes. It's actually quite a good read. It gives you a lot of the detailed internals of how things were written. It's a lot of fun. And I think, again, much like using GEOS does, I mean, Mike and I both dove into GEOS this week and really played with it a lot. And I think for us, what was striking is how sophisticated it actually was. I think I'd forgotten, it holds up surprisingly well to modern GUIs in terms of the feature set and the elegance of the user installation procedures and getting up and running with it and so on. And I think that is also reflected in the technical side of it. The sophistication of the APIs is also there. It really holds up well with modern GUI architectures, I think.
I'm glad it aged well. I don't think I would have imagined when I was 20 something, very low 20s. I don't think I even thought for a moment about whether that software is going to be in use in 5 years, let alone 20. So,
yeah, are you surprised to hear that people are still interested in it and that there's still podcasts and a community out here playing with this stuff?
No, just because I know. Well, that's the wonderful thing about the internet is when the internet came along, suddenly it's like, oh wow, everybody's got a forum, and there's a heck of a lot of people interested in wild and crazy things. And yeah, that's the wonderful thing about the future.
It is. Whatever strange thing you're into, there's a couple other 100 people out there that are into it too.
Yes, and considering all the times I go look at, I think I actually do have a TRS-80 emulator somewhere, but I certainly know about the community for that, and I know about all the communities for some other things that are current hobbies.
So what are you up to these days? What did you do after Berkeley and since then? I guess that's a long period of time, but in 100 words or less.
Well, I can do the long answer. Probably easier than the short answer. So the interesting thing for me was, so we go off and we do all this really cool software and actually ship the product and have a box to show, and that was really wonderful. But I remember there was one guy who had a master's degree who was able to do a lot of the low-level work on the operating system for PC GEOS. And I thought, oh, that would be great fun. I should do that. And that kept me from sort of trying to stay in consumer software. That made me think grad school would be interesting, that understanding operating systems would be better. And sent me away for 6 years for the wonders of grad school in computer science. And so I came out of that, got to be in a research lab for a while, finally got tired of the East Coast, moved back to the Bay Area, spent several years at Apple in the developer tools group, which was great fun and very tiring. I was there from 99 to 2007, so I ended up working on Mac OS X from some of the early developer previews. DP4, I think, probably had some of my code, all the way through, I guess, 10.5. Did some things I think were pretty cool there. So one of those was the refactoring feature in Xcode, which was one of the last things I worked on. So if people like that, that was me.
Cool. Yeah, I use that feature.
Yeah, I still use it, and I'm really happy that I've got it. Every now and then I'll see flaws. I would love to see the bugs. Sadly, I left just before it shipped, and so I never got to see sort of what complaints people had. The other thing I worked on was early on, I get called in by So early 2000, just before we're about to ship macOS 10.0, Dave Payne, my manager, calls me in and says, oh, hey, we've got this problem that everything's launching too slowly, that it's taking 4 seconds to launch Mail. And Kevin, the guy who's the dynamic linker guy, didn't have time to deal with it and was blowing off Bertrand, the VP responsible for macOS 10, when Bertrand came to Kevin and said, hey, we should do that pre-binding thing, that sort of automatically burning in the addresses of things so we don't have to figure them out when we load where printf is, for example. Kevin blew him off. Bertrand goes off for a weekend and hacks something together in a cafe in Palo Alto. And Dave Payne comes to me and says, hey, we need you to take Bertrand's code and make it into something that'll actually work. And so pre-binding was the idea that when an application starts up, you bring in a whole bunch of different dynamic libraries, different bits of code that are part of the system or part of the application. And you need to stitch everything together to say, well, when I call printf, I need to go to 10,000. When I call change the cursor, I need to go to this address. And normally that all got fixed up when you launched the process. But that was really slow because there was all this lookup. And so what the folks at Next had done back in the 90s to speed up launches was that they would install all the software on a machine, take a look at sort of the whole picture to see where everything was loading, figure out exactly where to load the libraries, just like the Apple II, of put it at these addresses, and then rewrite the binaries so that they all knew exactly where all the functions were going to be that were in other libraries. And so I got to do that for macOS 10.0. And this was something that if you've ever installed macOS, you'll often see this point where it says optimizing system performance, and then that goes off for a couple of minutes to do something. And that was me. I did that. So as I like to say, I always wanted to have an effect on the world. I just was hoping it was going to be a positive one. And Bertrand corrected me on that. He heard me saying that. He's like, no. This you actually got everything launching fast, and so that was a really good thing. But that was one of the things I worked on. And then there was the secret project where my manager my VP pulls me aside one day and says, hey, Robert, I need you to go to this meeting. And this was just as Apple was starting to think about actually doing the Intel switch. And we'd already been building everything for macOS, for Intel and for PowerPC since 1996. Next had been doing it, Apple kept doing it. And they realized that to be able to actually switch, we needed an emulator. And so they hired a company to actually do this work, a place in Manchester, England called Transitive. And they had a whole bunch of crazy kids fresh out of college that were working on this, but they needed some people from different teams inside Apple to help them out. And so there was one guy from graphics and one guy from low-level libraries. And I had touched enough of the dynamic loader code for starting up processes that they put me on that. And so I got to spend 6 months working on Rosetta, the PowerPC emulator that was for Intel Macs. And the fun of that was I was basically told, don't tell anybody on your team what's going on. Don't tell your manager what you're doing. You've been pulled away to a secret project. Make them, the line I remember was, make them think you have a drug habit and you're not coming in regularly anymore. I don't think that was, I think I actually did hear those lines from somebody. But so I got to spend, 6 months across the street in Mariani 1, Mariani 3, working with Jim Mensch, who'd been one of the Apple II guys. And he'd worked on Mac emulators in the past and worked with a few other people. And got to have the fun of working on this secret thing that I couldn't talk about. And my wife knew that I was sitting someplace else, and she knew I had to travel off to England and didn't know why. And then, 2 years later, I got to say, hey, kind of curious what I was doing 2 years ago. Well, check the news tomorrow morning.
Yeah, it's funny. Those legacies both went on for quite a while. I mean, yeah, Rosetta was a key piece of software for. Only recently was it dropped from OS 10, and a lot of software still relied on it. And of course, the optimizing system software step still happens every time you install something on Mac OS. So that's that pre-binding lives on as well. So that's quite a contribution.
Well, though luckily Nick Kledzik rewrote all that, and so it's much more efficient than it used to be. But so yeah, did that. Was at Apple for a while. Still very proud of those days. Was at Google for several years. And recently left that for some time off. Google was very interesting because I started running into all the old Berkeley Softworks folks. I kept making the joke that Google was one of these places that everybody good you ever worked with will be there. And there were 5 or 6. There were a bunch of people who had stayed at Berkeley Softworks and had worked on GeoWorks, the PC version, and had gone through GeoWorks' ups and downs. And then slowly, as that faded, they all started moving over to. A lot of them were in Seattle, and they ended up moving over to Google up in the Seattle and Kirkland offices.
Yeah, it sounds like your next stop needs to be Facebook, and then you've completed the Silicon Valley shuffle. Everybody seems to make that loop: Apple, Google, and Facebook.
That's certainly a common one. On the other hand, one of the things that I liked about Apple was that I was there in the days when people often use the term beleaguered. People weren't. There was just constantly this push of, okay, we need to ship macOS 10 to prove that it really is there. We need to get all the patches out so that people can actually develop on it. We need to make it so that Xcode is good enough so that we need to get it so that people are willing to develop Mach-O binaries, the native form, instead of the sort of the macOS 9 binary style, which Adobe and Microsoft were doing. Then we needed to make sure that they were actually building an Xcode so that when we switched architectures, that everybody would actually develop for macOS 10 instead of saying, hey, CodeWarrier's not supporting it. We don't want to deal with this. So that combination, that was very startup-like. The idea that there weren't a lot of people, because Apple then, and hopefully still is now, still thinks in terms of keeping staff very low and giving lots of responsibility and having people responsible for a wide range of stuff. And that reminds me a lot of Berkeley Softworks, of small teams, having 2 or 3 people working on something big, and having a lot of chances to play around with whatever's necessary and actually be really proud of what I worked on. So I could imagine the next place might actually be kind of small.
That was definitely Apple's sort of right after Apple's low point there. The late 90s was almost the end for the Big Apple.
I still have a lot of respect for the Apple folks. And I mean, I think they've got a lot more constraints now just because suddenly everybody's looking at them and they have the issues of macOS 10 versus the phone. But I can't imagine being on a different operating system these days. And
yeah, me neither.
Even with some of the changes, it still is being as perfect as I expect.
Yeah, it's still so much more pleasant than any of the alternatives for sure, I think. Yeah, well, I guess we drifted off Apple II there a bit. Mike, do you have any other sort of Apple II related questions?
No, I think this has been really great. It's been a lot of fun reliving. I was telling Quinn earlier, we recorded the news segment, and we were talking about how we came to GEOS. And my parents used to have to bribe me for good grades in high school, and one of the things that they bribed me with was a copy of GEOS, and that sort of really revolutionized kind of how I envisioned being able to use my Apple II. And I saw, going from, I think I did have AppleWorks at that point, but having just even an all-in-one productivity suite that had the GUI there on my II, and I didn't have to go buy a Mac to get that was really something special.
Cool. I'm glad that I was a positive influence on your life.
Absolutely, you were.
Yeah, for sure. I'll second that. I was probably the only 12-year-old who asked for GEOS for Christmas, but I did, and when I got it, that was one of the best Christmases ever because I was really excited by GUI technology and by desktop publishing in particular, and so to be able to play with that on my II without having to somehow find the money to upgrade to a 2GS or a Mac was really, really quite exciting. And yeah, I used GeoPaint in particular for many, many, many years, and GeoWrite was my go-to word processor as well. So yeah, great contributions. I think probably more than you may have realized at the time, for sure.
Well, that's I think what we're all aiming for when we're building these systems, that we're actually making a difference and people are actually getting some cool uses out of them. So I'm very happy.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you very much for talking to us today. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks for the chance to share stories. And yeah, you got me remembering a bunch of things I need to go check on now.
Great.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we'll be in touch. Maybe hopefully we'll try and figure out how to get your GeoCalc floppies over to somebody who can image them.
And I'll get you a photo of the GeoCalc box so you have proof that it actually did.
Yeah, that would be awesome, actually. If you want to send that over, we'll post it in the show notes for people to see. That'll be cool.
Will do. Thank you very much for talking with me.
All right. Well, that was fantastic to get all of
Yeah, I
that.
love that. That was so great.
Yeah. So let's. As part of our GEOS themed episode here, Mike and I spent some time playing with GEOS, and we were both big avid users of it back in the day. But I don't know about you, Mike, but I actually hadn't used it in probably 20 years. So was it new to you as well? Sort of rediscovering it.
Yeah, this has been a while. My parents used to bribe me with software in high school to get good grades. If I actually put forth an effort in some class and got a B or an A, they would buy me a piece of software. And one of the ones that I got was GEOS, and I loved it and hadn't used it in a long time, and played around with it quite a bit yesterday, and just sort of rediscovered how much I really, really like GEOS.
Cool. Yeah, me too. I don't remember how I first heard about it, but it was one of those things that I begged and begged and begged my parents for. I was at that age where, you beg your parents for things over and over. And it finally appeared under the Christmas tree one year. And I'm probably the only, 12-year-old or however I was who asked for productivity software that year. But it was so exciting to see it. And so it came with different packages. There was sort of a basic software-only version that was just like GeoWrite and GeoPaint and the core operating system. And then they had other versions that came with a mouse. And there was another version that came with an interrupt generator card, which we'll talk about here in a minute. So I thought I'd follow up that interview with just sort of an overview of some of the kind of technical details of GEOS for people who maybe aren't familiar with it or maybe have forgotten some of this stuff. So for starters, if you want to play with GEOS yourself, there are some great repositories of it online, and we'll link to my favorite one. Asimov has quite a good collection of GEOS stuff these days. For a while,
Mhm. Before we move on, since you're talking about websites and stuff for this, there's also a great overview if you just want to see it in action and have a nice review. Toasty Tech does the graphic user interface histories, and it's got a great write up for GEOS, the Apple II versions. So we'll have that as well.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, and for a while, GEOS was a little bit unobtainium. The current rights holder of it is a company called Breadbox, and they still make actually a GUI system for PCs that presumably was originally perhaps based on the PC version of GEOS that came along in the 90s, I think. But they released the Apple II version of GEOS to freeware in 2003, and for a long time, they hosted it on their own site. You could actually just download it right from them. And then somewhere along the way, those links quietly went away. And then it was kind of unobtainium for a long time. But a site called MacGUI, which has also kind of a cool collection of Apple II stuff hiding in their site.
David Finnegan's site.
Yes, thank you. They were hosting it as well. And I think we talked about it a few months ago on the show here. We'd mentioned it.
Mm-hmm.
A listener had written in, I think I had said, I couldn't find it. And then a listener had written in saying, oh, well, here it is on MacGUI. And then someone else followed up and I think put it up on Asimov. So it's now available there. So we will link to that so you can download it. And let's see. So yeah, I kind of want to roll into my my experience with it here yesterday. I spent basically most of the day playing with it. I didn't quite intend to. Mike and I had to kind of agree, let's both do some kind of a little project on it just to kind of get back into that GEOS mindset.
Please don't be as cool as mine. Please don't be as cool as mine. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So I had intended to do something, I don't know, in GeoPaint or GeoWrite. And what I actually ended up doing was spending most of the time playing with the operating system itself. I imagine this is how Linux users are. I actually spent the day playing with driver combinations and things and having kind of some fun with that. So I guess the first thing I'll say is that the 2C Plus actually is kind of the perfect GEOS machine. It turns out that GEOS is actually installable on large Protoss volumes, and I didn't actually know that at the time, because if you use it on the 5 1/4, it sort of seems like this walled garden. The disks aren't readable by anything else, and they boot into their own little world. So, but hiding in the GEOS menus, there is a tool that lets you install GEOS executables onto Protoss volumes, and so you can actually install it on, a hard drive, or one of the suggested use cases they have is actually installing it on a 3.5-inch disk on a 2C+. So I actually did that. I spent some time doing that, and it works really, really well. It was designed to run on 5.25, so the applications are all quite tight. But if you install it on a 3.5-inch disk, then you've basically got room for every GEOS application pretty much, plus plenty of room for your data on a single 3.5-inch floppy. So it kind of creates this ultimate GEOS experience environment that you can boot off a single disk. And so I did that, and I built that into a disk image that I will share in the show. We'll host it here on our site, which of course we can do legally. And I will link to that in the show notes if you want to play with it. It's kind of a handy, all-in-one way to experience it. And I'll take this moment to announce a sort of a mini contest. If you crack open that GEOS disk image that I'm going to share, there is a contest in there, and I will let you find it. There's a secret phrase hiding in that disk image, and the first person to email us that at feedback@open-apple.net will win nothing at all, except, I guess, fame and glory. So that was
password for today is Blondie Hex.
Yes. So that was my GEOS project, is I built this kind of ultimate disk image GEOS environment for the 2C+, and if you boot it and find the secret phrase and email it to us, you will be the winner of our contest. And just to make it extra challenging, the mouse driver in that package is for the 2C. So if you boot it into Virtual 2, you will find it almost unusable because the tracking speed is wrong. So this is intended to weed out the cheaters, so you can only really do this on a real 2C+. So, gauntlet thrown. Mike, what did you do with GEOS?
Well, one of the things, and in fact, you mentioned this, was that one of the things about GEOS that always bothered me was that it was this walled garden application thing. And so when you saved a file, it was in GEOS format, and you could only access it through GEOS and couldn't move it to anything else. And so I spent most of yesterday tweaking around in Apple Pascal and came up with a sort of maybe functional way to at least extract the GEOS word processing files.
Really?
And it's partially complete right now, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to automate like a transfer over to AppleWorks or other doc format or text format. So
wow,
that's what I did yesterday.
That's super cool. I think you win. that's way more awesome than what I did.
Well, I don't know, because you were describing it, and I was thinking, I hope that, if that the install process for the GEOS to put it on like the ProDOS volumes doesn't include like, oh, that also frees up your data, because then like that would have completely invalidated, or not invalidated, but negated the need for what I did. So
yeah, it definitely does not. What it allows you to do is you can now, look at after you do this ProDOS install process, you can look at the disks in ProDOS, and you'll see your files there, but they're not ProDOS files, so you still can't open them in anything else or view them in any kind of way. So that's right. Funny. They're sort of locked. They're still locked up, but you can see them. So which is progress, because otherwise the disks just sort of look like garbage to ProDOS.
Right.
So, and in fact, related to all this, actually, there is, I found in my research a wiki that documents the Apple GEOS file formats, and there is some effort to write tools to convert to and from GEOS files to and from ProDOS. So we'll link to that in the show notes as well. Your thing sounds very cool, Mike.
So I've duplicated other people's work. Excellent.
I think what you're doing is actually a little different. I think they're talking about converting the files, but not necessarily extracting the data, just kind of making the block headers readable, I think is all they're talking about.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, they use some weird compression format thing that took me a little while to kind of count through and figure out what was really going on there. I'm still getting half trashed files sometimes, and I'm not really sure. And this only applies to the word processing. I had no success with like GEOS Paint or anything else like that. Yeah. So this is not a complete all-in-one solution, at least not at this time.
Yeah, I can only imagine what what format GeoPaint might be in. I'm sure that's some totally arbitrary binary blobs of shape data and stuff. Yeah.
Probably so. Yep.
Well, I guess actually it's probably just a big bitmap, but heavily compressed. I think all the GEOS, yeah, as you probably discovered, this GEOS stuff seems to be all compressed because the files are actually quite pleasingly small, and I think that's no doubt necessary. It was intended to be run off 5.25-inch floppies, and it started life on the Commodore 64, which has even smaller floppies, so it needed to be tight in order for you to have enough space to have GeoPaint, let's say, and your actual documents on the same disk. That said, it's barely possible to do that. If you're going to use GEOS on 5.25s, you really want to have 2 drives.
Right.
You can create
at least.
Yeah, you can create what they call work disks, which is basically a blank GEOS disk that can hold files. And it really is happiest having your application in one drive and your data in the other.
Not to talk of vaporware features or anything, but my hope, if I can do because right now what I've done is still it runs in an Apple II environment. My hope is that if I can polish that off and make it pretty and work the way I hope it does, then I could do a CC65 something on so that you could run this on your desktop and have it extract from your disk images rather than, because right now it requires your floppy disks and that sort of thing. So it's still a bit cumbersome, but there's progress, and so I'm happy about that.
That's very cool. Yeah, if you get that cracked, for pardon the choice of words, I bet you could use something. I bet you could do something in shell scripts through, Apple Commander, because Apple Commander will let you pull the files out, and then once they're out,
even better.
Once they're out on your command line, then you can dissect them with, some kind of other tools with DD or who knows, set or awk or who knows what. I'm sure you can pick them apart with various shell tools then. Well, that's really cool, Mike. So let's talk a bit more about our sort of impressions of it. I think Mike and I both said we'd forgotten how good it actually is. Visually, I think it's really quite impressive. It's all kind of the black and white double high res mode. It looks fantastic in Virtual 2 monochrome mode, and I think on any monochrome monitor it's going to look fantastic. Originally, back in the day, I used it on my Laser 128, which has a switch on the top which will kill the color burst, and so it has like a black and white mode, and that made GEOS even better. I will say that on modern LCDs, the Night Owl LCD that we're also fond of struggles a little bit with that black and white double high res mode. It's kind of right at the limit of of what that monitor wants to display. It's certainly usable. It works fine. You do get some kind of rolling artifacts in the background because the background is this very soft gray created by alternating black and white double high res pixels, and that's. Yeah, the LCD doesn't love that, but if you can sort of overlook the sort of subtle rolling in the background behind your windows, it's really quite usable.
Why am I getting nauseated using GEOS? It's just moving in the background. No, I did catch that, and it's sort of for me. I sometimes I have trouble like staring at CRT, certain CRTs that are tuned to or just slightly off. They're like 60 hertz. I can sort of see the gun a little bit, and I have to look away every few minutes for a few minutes to reset, or I will end up sort of feeling sick afterwards. And I got a little bit of that with GEOS, but overall, I just, again, this was a nice reminder of what you could do with even an 8-bit Apple II. It feels a lot like what AppleWorks could have been on the Apple II had they put a graphical front end on it, because it's a nicely integrated package, and you can copy text into other programs, and I like that the programs within the suites can easily share data, which was sort of one of AppleWorks' big features. Unfortunately, you do want to use this in monochrome mode, like like Quinn said, because of the double high graphics, there's some ugly fringing that goes on there if you switch to color mode. And that's unfortunate if you're in the Paint or I forget if it's Paint or the Draw program, and you want to do colors. You have to switch to color and sort of deal with that ugly text so that you can draw in color and then switch back to read text. That's a little bit annoying. But overall, yeah, what a great program. And the other thing that bugs me, and this is less about the Apple II version specifically, is that if you go over to one of these Commodore 64 GEOS pages, there's so much stuff, so many add-ons and other programs that were written for it that just really turn this thing into an incredible program on that platform. And there's just none of that really that made its way over to the Apple II. And it would be great to have some of that available, but I guess you take what you have.
Yeah, the Apple II version definitely didn't get quite the support that the Commodore one did. That said, I think the Apple II version is honestly much more eminently usable. I had a Commodore 64 friend back in the day, and we used to talk about GEOS a lot because we both had it, and I had used it at his house, and honestly, I found it awful with the lower res screen and the joystick controls, and I thought really clunky. But that said, yeah, they did have a lot more software. Now, there is, I think, more GEOS software that came to the Apple II than I realized, and that was one of my pleasant surprises in this adventure. The package I had was GeoPaint and GeoWrite, but and that also comes with GeoSpell, the spell checker, and GeoDictionary, the dictionary for the spell checker. But it turns out there was also GeoPublish. Did actually come out for the Apple II, which I didn't know. That was one of the best parts of the Commodore 64 version. That was the desktop publishing, page layout kind of section of GEOS that lets you, make newsletters with columns of text wrapping around graphics and all that kind of stuff. Really, really powerful stuff. Really very Mac, level stuff. And that I had no idea that had actually come out for the Apple II. Now the only version of GeoPublish I could find was actually the version that came on 3.5-inch discs. So I don't know if there was also a 5.25-inch version of it, but that's included in the links that we'll have in the show notes. The super install that I made of GEOS does not include GeoPublish because GeoPublish is so big it actually fills 2 3.5-inch discs by itself. So there's really no way to include that, but it includes every other GEOS application and still has room for plenty of your own documents.
I wish there are two features, I guess, that I really wish had made it over to the Apple II from the Commodore. One was GeoTerm, which was a modem terminal emulation package that you could use to dial your favorite BBSs without ever having to leave GEOS, and that didn't make it in. And I guess there was a Commodore, like a high-level programming language for GEOS that was available to the Commodore folks that had APIs and things like that, and that was never available for the Apple II. So, bummer for us.
Yeah, if you Google GEOS information, you'll mostly find Commodore stuff because, the right. Apple II version was kind of the redheaded stepchild. Interesting you mentioned that programming language because when I came across that as well, and it seems like they were planning to release that for the Apple II or something because there's the documentation for that API actually includes Apple II stuff in it. So I'm not sure what the story is there, but it's pretty interesting.
Unless our guests told us when we interviewed them.
Yes. I mean, no, because they're here in the room with us because live show, something. That's
because we already interviewed them, not really.
Yes, that's the anti-magic of podcasting.
Right.
So I wanted to circle back a little bit to the use of... before I do that, Mike, did you use it on real hardware or in virtual too?
I had... you're talking about yesterday? I used it mostly in virtual too.
Okay, yeah, if you'd used it on...
and then on Apple Win on the Apple side, or the Windows side.
Okay, cool. Yeah, if you had used it on virtual too in 1988, I would have been really impressed.
I guess that's true.
So I took the higher road there and used it on real hardware because I wanted the full experience. So that gave me actually some.
You just want to turn your nose up at me. I know.
Yeah. I'm apparently a real hardware
all high
snob
and mighty
now.
and snooty.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I adore Virtual 2 actually, but I do almost all my Apple II stuff in it. But this time around, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go for the full Monty here. So, uh, but then yeah, spent the whole day building a 3.5-inch install that I could use, and then didn't end up doing much with it. So anyway, yeah. So circling back to what I was saying about the 2C Plus actually being kind of the perfect GEOS platform. So in addition to obviously having the mouse support. And the other great thing about it is the, of course, accelerator. Now, GEOS is really quite impressive at 1 megahertz. I ran it a bit at both just to kind of get a sense of how much better or worse it is. And for most applications, you don't notice a lot of difference with the 4 megahertz. It's so well written that it's surprisingly usable just at 1 megahertz. Their graphics routines must be just crazy good because they're doing full screen scrolling in the documents and stuff that is really quite remarkable. The one area that I did notice a difference was in GeoWrite. If you're using really big complex fonts, like 48-point font with an outline style or something, and it's an intricate font at 1 megahertz, you can actually see it. You kind of have to wait for it to draw that line of text as you scroll. So when it comes on the screen the first time, it has to render, and then it scrolls just the pixels. But whereas on the 2C Plus, it just kind of cruises right past that and kind of renders it automatically. So that was pretty cool. The other thing that makes a 2C Plus great for GEOS is, as any GSOS user with 5.25-inch drives knows, those old 5.25-inch drives are not well suited to GUIs because there's no way to detect if there's a disk in them. So, the way they all solve that problem is by rattling the head around until it gets an error to see if there's a disk in there or not. Yeah, and GEOS suffers from that as well. If you boot it with 5.25-inch drives connected with no disks in them, it'll take a while to scan drives and rattle the head around and figure out there's no disk in there. A workaround that a lot of us used, like when I had my GS, I just kept a floppy disk in all my 5.25-inch drives, just like a empty Protoss disk, just so because it would find them quicker than how long it took to figure out there was no disk. With GEOS, however, on the 2C Plus, the 2C Plus actually has disk detection on its internal 3.5-inch drive. So if you're running GEOS off of, say, a Unis disk or any kind of compact flash solution, then it actually instantaneously knows there's no disk in that drive. You see the light flash once, and so that's really cool. It doesn't slow down your operations. Otherwise, every time you open a file browsing dialog or anything like that, it has to scan all the drives to figure out which disks you have available, which gets a little tedious. So that's pretty cool on the 2C Plus that it does that. Now, an interesting side effect, I initially installed GEOS from my Unis disk connected to the smart port on the 2C, and it's sort of disorienting using it that way because I guess I'd forgotten how useful it is to have the disk drive noises to tell you when the computer is busy. So, because GEOS does a lot of stuff on the fly with the disk drive because, memory is so tight with all that they're trying to do. They're constantly swapping things on and off the disk kind of in the background. So using it off an SD drive, you just everything just goes dead sometimes for a few seconds. And then you glance at the display and you see the track numbers changing and it's like, oh, okay. Whereas running it off the 3.5-inch disk, the experience felt better because you just your brain kicks in that, oh, when the disk drive's making noise, I know it's doing stuff. And then it doesn't feel like things are stuck. Does that make sense? Like it doesn't. It does, yeah. It doesn't feel like anything has stalled because you're just used to, disk drive noises mean I wait now.
Right, exactly. Well, and that's actually one of the things that I don't like about some emulators. I think Virtual 2 actually will make disk chunking noises, which is really handy. But not all of the emulators will do that. And sometimes when you load up a disk image and it's just sitting there, you're like, is this thing loading? And because, I think like Apple Win has a little light indicators, but you have to go looking for that to see when there's activity. And some of them don't even have that. So you don't even know if this disk is doing anything or, especially if you've pirated something, and one of the things that would always happen on certain games when that you tried to pirate them when it booted is the disk would just spin infinitely with the Apple II at the top of the screen. Well, in an emulator, you don't know if that's okay. Is it frozen? Do I need to restart this process? What's going on here? So
yeah.
I totally identify with having been, Pavlovian training going on there with just drive noises, the drive chunks in my mouth waters, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think people think of the disk drive noise emulation part of Virtual 2 as just a fun gimmick, like the other noises that it makes, but it's really not. It's really a user interface with the Apple II, because so much software just relied on the fact that users knew if the drive was making noise, the software was busy. Nowadays we have spinny beach balls and things to indicate that software is busy, but that old software didn't have that. So like GEOS will just sit there on a blank screen for 10 seconds sometimes, and if you don't have the drive noises, you just wonder, is it dead? What's going on here?
Yep.
So that that was interesting. So that kind of actually leads into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is just kind of the overall architecture of GEOS. I think it's really very, very elegant, and in many ways quite superior to a lot of its contemporaries, the early versions of macOS and GSOS, and those types of things. So the operating system itself, it uses ProDOS as kind of a block device, possibly in a very similar way to the way Martin Hay uses it in his Mythos for Lawless Legends. Sorry, League of Legends is in my head these days. For Lawless Legends. So I think GEOS uses a kind of a similar way. So it is in a sense built on ProDOS, but not really. And but the structure of it is very clean and simple. There's a kernel file, and all of your drivers and everything live in a system folder on the disk, and whatever is in your system folder will get loaded as far as drivers, and whatever applications you want on that particular floppy also go in the system folder. Each application is just a single file, and it scans that system folder automatically, and then all the applications become accessible in the menu bar at the top of the screen. So it's really quite elegant. And if you select a different disk, it immediately knows what applications are on that disk based on the contents of that system folder. And it does all this very quickly. You don't necessarily feel that scanning or anything like that. So and this structure, at the same time being very simple, it's very transparent. So you open your system folder and you can see, there's my mouse driver, there's my printer driver, there's my serial port. And so you can literally drag drivers in and out and change your whole configuration. So it's a little bit like the Apple III in that regard, in that you set up a particular boot disk with a set of drivers that you want to use for that job. But the difference is it doesn't hide them all in some mysterious, format. The drivers are just sitting there. You can see them. So, and then there's also a little wizard that lets you if you don't want to try and find the driver files and stuff yourself, you can run this little wizard that just asks you, what kind of printer do you have? What kind of clock do you have? And it just finds all the files for you and makes you a little boot disk. So yeah, I was quite surprised how elegant it all is. And then sort of related to that is just how fast it boots, honestly, compared to GSOS or macOS, it's the difference is striking. I mean, GSOS boots really quite quickly, obviously slower than ProDOS 8 because it's loading a whole GUI, but yeah, it's usable in a couple of seconds. I mean, I spent half my childhood watching GSOS boot, so kudos to them for getting such an impressive boot time. What were your impressions of the sort of technical aspects of it, Mike?
Well, like I said, I spent most of my time trying to pick apart the file format, and I got to say the compression scheme that they used surprised me for how sophisticated it was. On the Apple II, they really are able to crunch those files down. I don't have the tech notes in front of me, and I don't want to sound like I don't want to have to come back next month and say, all those things I said, they were wrong. So, but I was very impressed at how efficiently there seems to be this innate recognition of, okay, this is an open sandbox, this Apple II, but it's very limited, and we need to make this absolutely as efficient as possible in every single way. And they managed to do that, and they managed to do that without making you feel like they cut corners when you are using it. Because sometimes you'll have a program that's been streamlined, and it's streamlined because it's missing features or it's buggy or it has to slow down in certain places to make up for what they took out, and you never get that feeling. The veneer of the GUI itself always felt like you were getting a full featured maximum interface that doesn't it doesn't feel like it suffers at all from the streamlining and the compression they did there. And so talking to, and it's especially for me impressive because it was, the Apple II version, as we heard in the interview, was basically a port of the Commodore version, and sometimes also ported software tends to be terrible, because they'll only change the stuff they absolutely have to make it run, and so you end up with this rickety machine that feels like it was ported, and games, we talk about those all the time, about how a game on one platform has been ported over to this other one and it's crap on the other one because they didn't actually do the work that they needed to make it a good port. They just made the code run, and so kudos to our interviewee or interviewees on doing such an amazing job of making this a native Apple II piece of software, even though it was a port from Commodore.
Yeah, this was clearly written from the ground up to be a GEOS product, but with Apple II in mind and with Apple II knowledge up front. So yeah, it really is really nicely written. And I think this is very astute what you said, that they definitely cut corners, but in areas that you don't necessarily notice unless you're really looking for them. And I did actually really look for them because I really wanted to know, how does this compare to modern GUIs? And I just came away so impressed with how close it was to, my current GUI environment. There was just little things like GeoWrite has all these great font styles, bold, italic, outline, and so on. Yeah, but you can't combine them. You can't do bold and italic. So little things like that are missing. Or GeoWrite has no undo. But they were careful not to cut corners in places where it really, really mattered. So like GeoPaint does have an undo, because that's, in a paint program, you really need that undo. That's really what makes, computer paint programs good, is the undo. So it has one. It's very primitive. It's only one level, and it has a tendency to forget if you don't use it right away. But it's there, so that it gives you just enough to do what you need to do.
I can just imagine spending 3 hours on some intricate, beautiful drawing, and oops, got that line wrong, got to start over.
Yeah. In fact, back in the day, I used to make drawings, blueprints, if you will, of spaceships. That was one of my little
nice
junior high hobbies. And
that's cool.
Gosh, I hope I can find those floppies someday. They're in my parents' basement. But one of the interesting things that GEOS did really well was kind of it understood the quirks of the Apple II and how to work around them. So one of the quirks of the Apple II, of course, is that the pixels aren't square. And, being this was the era of desktop publishing being, the thing, they built everything in with the understanding that you probably would want to print it. And, compare that to mouse paint, which was more along the lines of, we assume you're going to build images to look at on the screen. So the pixels, the circle tool made circles that looked round on the screen, and your document was the size of the screen. Compared to GeoPaint, where your document was the size of an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and when you draw circles with the constrained circle tool or this constrained square tool to make sure they're square, they look stretched on the screen, and they're doing that because it's the correct number of pixels in both dimensions to come out square or round when printed. And that takes some getting used to, I think, but it's actually, I think, very, very clever and very kind of forward thinking in that regard. So of course you can still draw, unconstrained things if you want to look around on the screen. But it was definitely all with printing in mind. So that was very cool, and they had all it contains just the right amount of, I think, file management and so on. The file management is definitely more primitive than, say, GSOS or something like that. You have to jump through some hoops if you want to copy a file from one disk to another, some of that kind of thing, or moving a file from one folder to another. You don't drag and drop so much as you kind of temporarily move things onto the desktop and back again. There's some little tricks you have to learn there. The link we include for the repository actually has the complete documentation in it, and you may want to skim that a little bit if you're going to play with GEOS. I did actually have to look some things up. One of those was, I accidentally saved one of my documents in the system folder, and I needed to drag it up one level on the disk, and I couldn't figure out how to do that. Turns out what you have to do is drag the file onto the desktop and then drag it back onto the disk, and that will move it up one folder level. But that was not obvious. So little tricks like that where they had to come up with workflows that you might not expect to get around the limitations of the hardware. They couldn't do animated dragging and dropping through folder trees, the way you would on a modern, Mac or something like that. They had to come up with more, let's say, lightweight ways to do some of that kind of stuff. So, there's some weird little quirks like that. But overall, I think, for the most part, I was able to do everything I wanted in GEOS without really looking at the manual. So that's pretty impressive for the time.
Absolutely, yeah. That's an important thing, especially when you're designing a GUI. Is the less time that your users have to spend looking stuff up in a manual or a help file, the more successful I think you've been at creating that GUI.
Yeah, for sure. And it gets a little strained in some places. I played with GeoPublish a little bit, and honestly got nowhere with it. That's clearly an RTFM situation. That software is much more complex. But GeoWriter, GeoPaint, yeah, I mean, it's immediately obvious what you need to do. Perhaps partly because we've all now grown up with GUIs and we understand the paradigm. But I think even back then you could probably muddle your way through most tasks without much difficulty.
Yep.
So if you want to try GEOS out for yourself, we've included in that link all the disk images for the 5 1/4 inch version, as well as my super install. Like I say, I do recommend trying this either in Virtual 2 if you're going to boot it from the 5 1/4s, or if you have a 2C+, of course, my super disk image is awesome. If you're going to do it on real hardware, I do recommend multiple drives. You will spend a lot of time swapping disks around otherwise. At one point, I copied a 100K file from one 3.5 inch disk to another. I was juggling some things trying to get my disk image going, and I was sad. I spent the better part of 10 minutes swapping disks back and forth to copy that file because I only have one 3.5 inch drive. So don't make that mistake. So the disk images it comes on 4 disks. There's each disk is double-sided, so the disk images from the repository, of course, aren't labeled. So and GEOS asks you to insert disks with various names on them. So I thought it would be helpful to just explain what each disk actually is. Disk 1 is the first. Disk 1 side 1 is your boot or desktop disk. GEOS refers to it both ways. Disk 1 side 2 is the demo disk, and it actually includes kind of little interactive movies of future GEOS products, which are really cool. There's 3 on there, and as far as I can tell, only one of them ever came out. GeoPublish is on there. There's also demos for GeoCalc and GeoFile, and users, please write in and tell me if I'm mistaken here, but I could not find those. So I looked everywhere and could not find either of those applications. They look pretty complete. They're obviously a spreadsheet and a database, respectively, but it does not appear that they ever came out. So if I'm mistaken on that, please let me know. Disk 2, both sides are just drivers. They're literally called drivers and more drivers. So if GEOS asks for those disks, you know what they're talking about. Disk 3 is side 1 is GeoWrite, side 2 is GeoPaint and desk accessories. GEOS has its own system of desk accessories similar to GSOS. So, if you want to have a calculator or the obligatory sliding tile puzzle to play with, those are all on the GeoPaint disk. GEOS has they do a lot of this where they just kind of shove things in wherever they had space. So right. If you want to have some fun with GeoPaint, one of the first things you do is you copy the GeoPaint disk and then delete all the desk accessories off of it so you have room for your document. If you have OneDrive, that is. Let's see, disk 4, side 1 is GeoSpell and the LaserWriter support. So one of the amazing things about GEOS is it had full support for laser writers. So if you wanted to do some serious desktop publishing, you could. They had special fonts, I guess, that were sort of PostScript-y kind of. But yeah, it had a whole series of dedicated application, kind of mini and helper applications specifically for page layout and printing on laser writers. So GEOS Spell and the Laser Writer support is on disk 4, and the backside of disk 4 is the Geo Dictionary, which is, of course, used with GEOS Spell. And GEOS Spell I never used much because the dictionary is literally on a different side of the same disk. Unless you take the time to make a separate disk and copy the dictionary to it, you will spend a lot of time flipping that disk over while spell checking your document. So I don't necessarily recommend that. That seems like a bit of an oversight, but it's kind of neat if you do go to the trouble of doing that. It's kind of neat. You can watch it shoot back and forth between the drives while it spell checks your document. But of course, as you can imagine, the dictionary is huge, so it fills an entire disk by itself. But it's pretty neat. The dictionary is both a data file and an application, so you can open it and actually add your own words and change words and so on. So that's kind of neat. But that's nice. But that's it for the basic package. So hopefully, you guys will give that a shot and be as impressed with it as we were. Do you have any more closing thoughts, Mike, on that, or should we move on?
Get GEOS, play with it, love it. It's great.
Amen. I could not have said that better myself. All right, well, let's get back into some news, shall we?
It may be old, but there's still news. Apple II news.
All right, Mike, I think this first item is yours. Why don't you tell us about it?
All right, Quinn, have you, surely you've seen the Computer Chronicles?
I have. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, and that show by Stuart Chaffee, of course, played a big part in a lot of early Apple II news type things for at least people like me. And I'm sure it wasn't broadcast in every market, but I know for a while was it on PBS? I don't know if it was or not, but certainly on whatever public access educational. Like if the channel showed Sesame Street in the afternoon, it probably showed Computer Chronicles in the evening at some point. And of course, one of the co-hosts of the Computer Chronicles for a while was Gary Kildall of Digital Research Incorporated, CPM fame, that sort of thing. And now there is a spoof of the Computer Chronicles called Computer Show. And so far there have only been 2 episodes of the show released. They're both available on YouTube, and they're only 10 minutes long a piece. And the hook, I guess, if you want to call it that, is that, so the hosts of the show, well, there's 1.5 hosts, I guess, and I'll get to that in just a minute, are in the 80s, okay? But the guests that they have on are like Lumi.com, people like in the here and now, and so they're describing these things. These, like Lumi, I think is a site where you can store and edit and print your pictures and stuff like that. And they're describing this to a 1983 Gary Kildall. And so they're like, generally we find it's easier to manipulate your photos when they're on the computer. And he's like, well, yes, I have my I have my paintings sitting on top of my computer right now. And watching him squirm. But the amazing thing is the host he's got Kildall nailed. He sort of looks like him, but the mannerisms and the way he talks, I mean, you're like, geez, is that Gary? But he's also very full of himself and tends to cut people off. They'll try to explain these things. Oh, I got it. And then just move on to the next segment. So the first episode, he introduces a female co-host and she says her name. And I think that's all she ever says on the show because it's all just Kildall for the rest of it. Now, each one of these is only 10 minutes long. So I don't think it's, it's not going to take a whole lot of your day, and they're hilarious. I think you should check them out. And there's Apple II stuff all over them. I think the company that produces them puts their logo on an Apple II screen when it starts, and you can see one sitting in the background. So there's your Apple II connection.
Yeah, this is just a great watch. This thing is, even if it didn't have an Apple II in it, I think we would have been forced to link to this because it's so funny. They've got the production values nailed. I mean, it looks exactly like an 80s TV production, with the yellow chunky subtitles, and this sort of has that 80s color tone
synthy
to it.
Music.
Yeah, and the synthy pop music, and the supercut intro of people turning knobs and looking off into space and terrible 3D cubes rotating and things. It's just, it's perfect. They've absolutely nailed it. So if you've spent any time watching Computer Chronicles, or the other one that I grew up with was Bits and Bytes with Luba Goy, which may have been a Canadian thing, I'm not sure, but it's also on YouTube. But yeah, they've nailed the tone of these 80s computer shows perfectly. So bravo.
What's next?
Let's see. So there's been talk going around of a previously undiscovered Apple logo that has been found. And this is an interesting article. I feel like it has been reported perhaps a little bit more breathlessly than it deserves, but it's interesting. So this guy, I guess, went through some old publicity photos and things of Apple, and he found different versions of the Apple logo. So the color striped one that we all know and love, he found versions of it that were aligned differently. The stripes are different, and ones that had different colored stripes. And I don't know what your impression of it, Mike, was, but mine was that some of his quote findings were legit, like the different alignment and earlier versions of the color logo is definitely interesting. The different colored versions, I think there's a little bit of him maybe extrapolating too much from very low-res fuzzy photos. What was your thought on this?
Yeah, I think some of that might have just been, the printing process, the dye sub printing process that puts a color Apple logo on a piece of newsprint or slick magazine paper is going to look different than the spray paint process used to put a logo on a piece of plastic that goes onto your Apple II. So I don't know about the colors. Now, it's interesting that, so back in 2009, I guess there was an interview with Rob Janoff, I'm not sure if you pronounce the J there, the guy who originally created the rainbow Apple logo, the one that came after Ron Wayne's intricate but really overwrought and kind of useless Newton Apple logo that appeared on the Apple I documentation. And in this interview, he talks about, it's a little bit further down, he talks about how there's actually a second version of that logo that was created by, where did it go? By a company called Landor Associates. And in that interview, there's the picture of the way of the logo that he designed, and then there's the picture of the Landor Associates logo and it's the one that when you see the Apple computer and it's in that modern Tectura font and the logo is to the left and the little bite out of the apple aligns with the curve in the A, that's the Landor Associates, and those are the pictures that appear in this other article that we're talking about now. So I'm not sure that there are any discoveries at all here.
Yeah, I wonder, but it's interesting. It's an interesting read.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
There's definitely.
It's always fun to read about that kind of stuff. I'm not slamming the guy. I don't know how much of this is new research, and it's not even that. I don't think he went and ripped anybody else off. This is obviously independent research, and so it's cool to see somebody digging around like that. I just don't know that there are any new conclusions to be had. Yeah,
I think this is a case of this guy doing some interesting digging for his own amusement. And then it got picked up and kind of over-reported a little bit. Other news outlets always looking for interesting Apple angles, I think, decided, this was previously undiscovered something, blah, blah, blah.
Well, we've talked about how, when something appears on Mac Rumors, it's going to be on Cult of Mac and Inside Apple and all these other blogs. They all tend to copy each other, and again, with the same breathless reporting. So,
yeah, sometimes I think those sites just have RSS feeds running on each other and they just cross post automatically, and if you went to their offices there'd just be an empty room with a tumbleweed and one sad IT guy in the corner.
That's right.
Anyway, the article itself is a good read, I think. All right, so moving right along. So there's been this video series on YouTube called How Old School Graphics Worked. And they've been talking about all different 8-bits and other machines, but the latest video has a section on the Apple II. And what's, I think, cool about this, and the reason it's worth talking about here, is it's a very approachable, very high-level explanation of how Apple II high-res graphics work, the basic high-res. I think maybe if there's, non-programmers out there who have ever wondered, why color fringe happens, or why, the 6 colors are the ones they are, or why, certain colors are never next to each other in Apple II artwork, those types of things. He does a really nice kind of short, clear, simple explanation of it with nice animations. So I think it's worth a watch.
Yeah, it's I think a neat series overall if you're just interested in how those graphics in general used to work on the old 8-bits. Part 1 is about Commodore and Nintendo, and part 2 is Atari and Apple, and it's mostly Atari, but we've talked in the past about what a confusing vortex the Apple graphics memory map can be, and it's jumps all over the place, and trying to figure that out can be confusing, and typically any article that tries to explain it, like you said, Quinn, gets complicated very quickly, which is great if you're the programmer type. But if you're a user and you want to understand, then this video is wonderful. So yeah, I absolutely agree that this is worth watching.
Yeah, it's a real nice high-level view that doesn't get too deep. And he also, I like that he calls out the fact that the reason, he explains it all, and he's like, well, that sounds really awful, doesn't it? But here's the reasons, because, this system was made in 1977, and, its contemporaries that it so often gets compared to were, 5 and some, even 6, 7, 8 years later. So it's not really fair to compare Apple II high-res graphics to, a Commodore 64 or something that came out 5 years later. Obviously, they're going to be better. We learned a lot about how to do high-res graphics. When the Apple II came out, of course, the fact that it had any color at all, like showing any kind of color, was amazing. So, I think I have to appreciate it in its proper context. Well, speaking of making high-res graphics do cool things, David Schroeder has come out of the woodwork lately, and he's been writing for Gamasutra. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, he's got a blog over there, and the most recent entries have been about his old Apple II computer games, and how sort of a short high-level look at how he created Crisis Mountain and Dino Eggs, and it's neat. The articles aren't very long, and they don't get too technically deep, but he's held on to a lot of his notes, and he scanned them in, and you can look at the handwritten, like he's got the sheets of graph paper that I think we all had when we were trying to make our awesome game that Origin was going to buy and publish and pay us $1 million for, and on it, the lines that line up, the grid across the top and down the side for the horizontal and vertical, and he scanned and posted a few of those, and it's really cool because sometimes as we do Open Apple, we interview some people who have a deep knowledge of the things that they've done, a deep memory, and they can still recall that and talk intelligently and remember all the great details that make for that sort of great technical interview. And then we interview some people who can't always remember the specifics of the tech stuff. They might remember, a cool encounter that they had with Woz and Jobs that nobody's heard of before. And those interviews are great that way. But they can't always remember, if you start talking to them about how their code worked, they kind of fuzz out a little bit because that's all gone. Well, so when a guy like this holds on to all of his notes and is able to recall it and speak about it in clearly and concisely, it makes for great blog entries. And so you should definitely head over to Gamasutra, I don't know, and read those.
For sure. I absolutely love it when these old game programmers kept their notes. Those scribbled diagrams and graph paper, scraps of graph paper are just historical gold, and I absolutely love it that so much of that stuff is still around. So yeah, I think these articles I almost wish they were longer because they really are a fun read, and the comment threads are worth reading too because people will ask astute questions, and David follows up on people's questions and so on, and he goes into just enough detail that it's not too technical if you're not a programmer, but he talks about some of the timing things he did and some of the challenges with organizing Apple II memory and stuff. So excellent read if you're a programmer or not.
Well, he's also got a really great way of writing that's humorous, and for example, he's got the blog entry for Crisis Mountain is called "There's No Such Thing as a Random Number," and he's got a few rules that he realized as he was programming this. And the first is, computer memory is brittle and fleeting. Without power, the work disappears. Gone. Saving one's work is not intuitive. When something goes wrong, reboot. Stuff like that. So humorous and definitely worth a read if you're into the history of those games.
If you're someone like me who enjoys reveling in what's wrong with the kids today, the comment threads are fun for that, because there's the Dino Eggs article has a whole thread with one of the younger programmers that Gamasutra has many of, who's trying to understand the timing stuff that David talks about, and how, why didn't you just use, a millisecond reference timer? And you see David sort of try to explain that there was no real-time clock in this computer, so there was no way to measure time. And plus everything there's only a single code path, there aren't multiple things running at the same time. And that it's interesting to me how alien these concepts are to younger programmers who've never used a true, single pipeline, single process machine with no clock in it.
Watching brains short out as they try to grok these simple concepts that are so simple that there must be more to this.
Yeah, I think that's what trips them up, is that they don't understand how actually simple it is. Like it's so much more primitive than they think it could possibly be, and still run a video game. So I think that's what throws them, is they're not thinking small enough.
Kids these days.
Yeah, rawr, something my lawn. Okay. So moving right along, let's talk some hardware stuff here, Mike. Looks like we got classic IDE cards coming again.
Yeah, Technobytes, the Brazilian company that made that initial run of the classic IDE card, have announced that there are more cards available, and I'm on their webpage right now, and it looks like as of now, there are still cards available to purchase. The device sells for $70 US. It'll take about 10 days for them. I don't know if they're building them as ordered, but it says 10 days to dispatch, which I assume means to get in the mail to you. So order now, because I know that the first batch, I think, was spoken for completely before they were even available. And I don't know how many they have left, or if this is if they have like a limited amount, but you don't want to find out the hard way that they do.
For sure, yeah. If you're looking for an alternative to the CFFA, since they kind of aren't available right now, this looks like a great option.
Now, I think this is only, I think the only connector on it is an IDE. So if you want to do something like a CF card, you'll need to buy a converter for IDE to CF as well.
Yeah, which fortunately those are readily available for anyone who doesn't know. Compact Flash is basically is IDE. It just has a different connector on it. So you can buy these little adapters that will let you plug a Compact Flash into any IDE device, including this one.
Yep. Somebody in the comments section asks about future firmware releases. They want to use the classic IDE as a Disk2 emulator, and the response from Richo, I assume is one of the developers, says that we have plans for something just like that. A solution in the meantime is using the classic IDE to implement a Disk2 emulator. Probably a firmware update isn't enough, but we're working on a solution. So big hugs.
Awesome stuff. All right, so Mike, every so often you drop a news item in here that makes my brain melt, and this is one of those. It seems that VNC View GS has been updated, and my reaction to this was, wait, what? That's a thing? Apparently there's a VNC client for the 2GS. What's going on here?
Right. So this is this is a VNC, as we said, this is a VNC client for your Apple IIgs, which will allow you to interact with your modern desktops if they're running a VNC server program. It's been updated to, I believe, version 1.0b, and now includes the source code. I don't remember if it did before, but if you want to go in there and play around, you now have the opportunity to do that.
Now, I assume this runs on like Marinetti over something like an Uthernet?
Right. You do need a TCP/IP connection.
Okay. That's fantastic.
And attendant hardware. So
yeah. Okay. That's wow. Just it's one of those things where people do these really modern things on these old machines that sometimes just blows my mind. So I guess for anyone who doesn't know, a VNC is kind of a standard for remote desktop use. So, it's popular with system administration and IT professionals who need to, log into or need to see what's on the screen of someone else's computer remotely, so you can kind of remotely control other computers that way.
Or if you're just lazy like me and don't want to get up and go upstairs when your favorite show is on to do something on your Windows, Macintosh or Windows computer.
Yeah, Apple has sort of their own proprietary version of this called screen sharing, and I use it at home here because I've got an old Mac running my home, media server. So, and I also have a main machine that's built on a Mac, so I use VNC for that to sort of remotely look at those machines and configure them, so I don't have to have keyboards and monitors hooked up to everything.
Now it is a little bit limited as far as other VNC clients that you would get if you were working purely on modern platforms. You won't be able, unfortunately, to copy files from your modern platform over to your 2GS that way, but you can at least interact with and manipulate the desktop remotely.
Somewhat limited. Oh, I'm not interested. No, that's
forget it. We're going to cut this piece then.
Yeah. No, that's very cool. Okay, so moving right along. So this next item I put in here just because I really enjoy it when the Atari podcasts talk about Apple II stuff on their shows. And this one particularly amused me because on Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast, which is an awesome show, by the way. You should all listen to it. They do an interview with the fellow who designed the Pong chip. So towards the end of the 70s, there was an explosion of home Pong machines. And what precipitated that was this development of creating an entire Pong game on a single chip. And then that made it really cheap to clone and make Pong machines. So everybody from Sears to, Fujimoto Heavy Industry had their own clone of the Pong home console. So what's awesome about this interview, though, is that he spends most of the time talking about how much he loved his Apple II. So it's worth listening to, I think, because he manages, he's a true fan, because he manages, no matter what question he's asked by the intrepid Atari interviewers, he manages to pull the conversation back to the Apple II and how great it was and how much it influenced everything that he did. So if you want to have a little Atari Schadenfreude, I recommend listening to that interview.
Cool.
So, Mike, tell me about Apple II music. Those aren't two words we often use together.
Yeah. So if you really want an Apple II challenge, go make some music on your favorite 8-bit Apple. There's an annual. I don't know if this is annual or not. I guess it would be an annual contest. It's called the 1-bit music composition contest. Let me pull that up here just to make sure I'm not lying. This is called the 1-bit Forum Music Compo 2015, and there are a number of categories. There's the 1-bit classic category, which is music for your ZX Spectrum and 8-bit Atari, for example. There's 1-bit alternative, which is the PC speakers, what they call the Apple Hooter, the ZX81 calculators, Apogee, Channel F, that sort of thing. There's 1-bit wild category for fake 1-bit stuff, so stuff that you've actually made with your favorite VST or your DSSI, sampling, that sort of thing, but it sounds like 1-bit music. There's the 1-bit 1K category, which is a 1-bit song that fits into 1 kilobyte. And then there's the 1-bit code section, which is a 1-bit routine for a platform of your choice. And Daniel Crew, who has been on the show before and is a regular at KansasFest, and I believe he's also partnered with Melissa Barron, who's been on the show and is an awesome Apple II artist in her own right. He entered a song called Moving Day into the Apple II section and came in 3rd overall. The results are up, and you can check out his entry and everybody else's over. We'll have the link in the show notes, and be sure to check out Crew's own Apple II music pages. They're pretty darn awesome.
That is very cool. Sort of related to that, when I was playing with GEOS, I took a brief break to play with Michael Mahon's music software, the DMS drummer and the other music sequencer tool that escapes me now. He showed them a lot at KansasFest this year, and they are utterly fantastic.
Sweet.
But I'm not a musician, so I didn't really know what I was doing. But it was impressive, actually, the music that an Apple II can make when given the right software. Cool. Well, let's see. Moving right along to some other hardware stuff. We talk a lot about Charles Mingan on the show because he does awesome stuff, and most recently he's been doing some Apple II related videos, and they're really nicely produced. We talked about one last month about installing a headphone jack on your Apple IIc Plus, that is. So he's done a new one about how to fix the keyboard on an Apple IIe, and this is something that you might do at KansasFest, or you might read an article about, but there's if you're not able to do either of those things, or you're scared to try this, there's nothing quite like seeing a video of someone actually doing it, and that's really quite illuminating. So he walks you through how to replace broken keys and that sort of thing. It's a great watch.
Yeah, he focuses specifically on broken key switches, the little post that holds the keys in place, and also how to upgrade the power light, power light bulb on your keyboard. I guess that those tend to burn out and they're kind of fragile, and now you can replace it with an LED, and he shows you how to do that.
Yeah, that's a great idea, actually, because those bulbs also run quite warm, and this is something that actually sort of unrelated, but this is something that pinball people do a lot of, because an incandescent bulb sitting under plastic will dry out and crack the plastic over time, and also sometimes yellow it. So if you've got a IIe with a nice looking power light and you want to keep it nice looking, putting an LED under it is a terrific idea.
Sure.
All right, so we talked just a minute ago about the Uthernet II. It's now shipping, is that right?
Yes, you can buy one for your very own self at a2retrosystems.com. It's Glenn Jones's personal webpage. It's not really a business; it's just something he does on the side. So he tends to only make these batches of Uthernet and Uthernet II cards infrequently, and when he does, they sell quickly. They're very popular items. It looks like for the first time, the batches didn't sell out immediately. With the most recent one, you can go and buy your own for $70, or if you were a good enough photographer, you could have won one in the Retro Apple II photo contest. The winner has been announced, and
that's over on MacGUI, is that right?
Yeah, it's on MacGUI, and we have a correction about. We'll do the correction right now. Last month we had said that the contest, there was a photo contest where the idea was that you took a picture of your Apple II equipment, but you made it look like the picture was taken back in the 80s, and we had said mistakenly that the program, or the contest, was sponsored by Call Apple, and in fact it was sponsored by David Finnegan and MacGUI City. And the winners have been announced. The first place winner was a picture of an Apple II Revision 0 and the monitor, and there's a little calculator, old HP calculator sitting on top of it. And, by Corey986, who I believe is the same Corey that does the Apple I fix-ups and evaluations for Apple I auctions for the big auction houses. He's a big forum user over on Apple Fritter if you want to interact with him. But he won first prize, so he won himself a free Uthernet II card. The second prize winner was of an Apple IIe playing Choplifter, and there's a bunch of software piled around it, and a Computist magazine and joystick and cool stuff like that. That was won by Mike Stevens, and he won free shipping on a card. So. And there were several honorable mentions, and you can see all the pictures of all the entries over at MacGUI City, and we've got a link in the show notes for that. So, congrats to the winners, and it's awesome. All the entries, they're great photos. Love them.
For sure, yeah. And if you have any interest at all in getting TCP/IP on your Apple II, you should definitely go buy one of these cards. Glenn's a stand-up fellow, and I think that's a super reasonable price for how much this card is doing. Fantastic.
Indeed.
All right, well, moving right along, the French Touch has certainly been busy lately. They have been making 8-bit Apple II demos, which is, not something we ever saw a lot of. The Apple II not being exactly a multimedia powerhouse like the GS was. The demo scene never quite took off on the Apple II 8-bits, but so the French Touch has come up with a new demo called Plasmagoria, and it's quite a nice sort of series of animations, what you would call from the demo scene. They call this a plasma effect. It's kind of a cool emergent behavior you can get by doing some calculations on all of the pixels that are around a current pixel. It was often used, for example, for making flames. You can generate quite nice fire effects if you do it with certain colors. So it's kind of a plasma-like effect on the Apple II using both ASCII text and some low-res graphics. And the frame rate is fantastic, and that's really, really nicely done.
Every time I see the name of this demo, I keep thinking of that old game Phantasmagoria.
Yeah, that I suppose that's true. That's kind of similar.
So you're like, what?
Nice observation,
All right,
Mike.
All right, so yeah, the French Touch, they've been at this for a while. Recently, they did one called Unlimited Bobs. I don't know if we talked about that one. They've done one called Ibiza 2. I don't know what that means. But if you head over to their webpage or to their YouTube page, you can see all of their videos. I think one that we mentioned recently was called Crazy Cycles. Does that sound familiar?
Yes, that's right. Yep, Crazy Cycles and Scroll were kind of related. Yeah. Yeah, they were both playing with changing graphics modes, mid-screen to combine, text and low res and high res in ways that shouldn't be possible. Very cool stuff. What's cool about these demos is that, while they might not be incredibly impressive compared to, some of their sort of contemporaries on the Commodore or Atari 8-bits or the GS, they are Butari. They are, I think, true to what demos are all about, which is to take the hardware you have and make it do things that people would not expect are possible. And they're definitely doing that. So I don't think it's right to compare these to other demos on other platforms. I think it's about comparing a demo to your expectations of what the hardware is capable of. And in that regard, the French Touch is just crushing it. They're doing things, that just make your mind hurt if you know anything about how Apple IIs work. So bravo, the French Touch. Well, let's see. Next up here, we've got, I think, an item that probably the entire Apple II community is on the edge of their seat waiting for.
Oh, yeah.
This is everyone's favorite Bulgarian Plamen's VGA adapter for the 2C. And this is just, by all accounts, a fantastic device. And everyone's favorite retro writer, Javier Rivera, has done a bit of a hands-on review over on A2 Central. It's an excellent review, gives you an overview of the device. And, as though I needed any more motivation to buy this thing, it just, this thing can't come soon enough as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, so Javier does a good job with the write-up, like you mentioned. He talks about how, the problem with the Apple IIc video out is that the signal from the video part isn't standard. And there haven't really been a lot of attempts up until recently to make a connector so that you could do video out from your 2C onto, like, say, your television or something like that, or to your modern LCD and have a good picture. So they mentioned there's one way back from Video 7, which is called the Video Enhancer, that would connect you to an RGB monitor, but you're still kind of out of luck with the LCDs and things like that. And then more recently, Nishida Radio had a 2C adapter, and that was very popular and it worked really well. It didn't come with an enclosure, but it doesn't matter because he's out of the business. So if you wanted one now, you were out of luck. But fortunately, Plamen has stepped up and has created this thing. It looks like his Apple II A2 Heaven page that we talked about last month isn't up and running yet. So I don't know if you can buy these things just yet, but and I hope they're coming soon because I definitely want 2 or 3 of these.
Yeah, they're not quite available yet, but it's very, very, very soon. And I think what's really striking about Plamen's devices is that he's definitely bringing it to the next level. He's got nice enclosures. He's taken the time to make things small and compact and nice looking. His SD Floppy 2 SD card device is the same way. It's got a really nice aluminum enclosure, and this VGA device has a nice color matched, beige enclosure with a nice color logo on top. It's just, they're really nice looking devices, and his prices are really reasonable. So, I can't think of any reason not to buy 10 of these, honestly. Well, speaking of cool hardware devices coming along the pipe here, we've got a Mockingboard clone available again. Is that right?
Well, it was.
It was. Yep. Okay.
This is an example of why you should, as soon as you hear about one of these things, if you're waiting, sort of the disadvantages, I guess, of small scale electronics production is that if it's a popular item, it's going to sell out quickly and may not show up again for quite some time. The Ultimate Apple II, which of course is Henry Corbis and Anthony Martino, had a new run of the Mockingbird V1A clone that they made. They originally released it a few years back. It sold out almost immediately. They had more of them available for $85 a piece. Those are sold out. And normally I wouldn't bother to talk about something that you can't get, except that this is a good reminder that if you want one of these types of things, you should probably jump on them as soon as you can. Now they do have a handy feature on their web store that will allow you to be notified by email as soon as a new product is available. So definitely take advantage of that if this is something that you were waiting on and missed out on.
Yeah, I think that is an excellent reminder that if these products come along, like the Uthernet is available, the Uthernet II is available now, if you want one, go get it right now. Pause the show and go get it, because these homebrew projects, nobody's making a ton of money doing this, if any, and people only make them as their real lives permit them to. So you never know, they might go away forever tomorrow. So when they're around, go buy them. Run, don't walk.
And you certainly can't bank on there being another run at some point in the future. We've been lucky with the Uthernet card and with a few of these others that the manufacturers have have stuck around with the Apple II hobby and have eventually made more runs available. But Nishida Radio's out of business. Who knows if he's coming back? You may never be able to get his stuff again, except for thousands of dollars on eBay. So run, don't walk.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely regret all the Nishida Radio things I didn't buy because I thought, I don't need
too.
it. Yeah, I don't need it right now. I'll get it later. And, I want to do some other stuff first. And now I can't get any of them.
I need to eat and pay my electricity.
So speaking of hardware acquisitions, that was a terrible transition, but I'll roll with it. Regular right. KansasFest attendees know one of the very best parts of that already amazing conference is the garage giveaway, where on the first day there's a big table set up and tons of hardware is piled on it from various sources, and then someone says go, and everybody charges in and takes whatever they want, and
there's fist fights, and hair pulling and screaming.
Yeah, I think last year 7 people were killed, but it was all worth it for the Apple II, love of Apple IIs.
I got what I needed.
Yeah, the only real rule is nothing that you get, it's all free, but nothing you get can show up on eBay, because this is about keeping the hardware in the community and getting it into the hands of people that will appreciate it and hopefully give something back to the community with it. So much of, if not most of the stuff comes from Sean Fahey's collection, and he pays considerable money to store and transport that stuff every year to KansasFest. So this year they started a GoFundMe campaign, which is a crowdfunding site, to collect some money to kind of help offset those costs. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes. They've achieved their goal of $3,500, which was modest, and I'm glad that they achieved that. But they're still taking donations. So if you want to pitch in and give something back to the garage giveaway, I strongly encourage you to do so.
Yeah. So for me anyway, the garage giveaway itself is reason enough to go to KansasFest, just because of the cool. Like a couple of years ago, I got an Apple II Plus. It was one of those that the dealers, way back when, before Apple did the test drive a Macintosh where you could rent a Mac for a while. They did that with Apple IIs as well. The local dealers were allowed to rent, or you could take home an Apple II for a while and demo it. And I at one of these giveaways was this Apple II box with the matching 2 Plus still in it, all the documentation and everything. And the great thing about this is, if you're there at KansasFest, this is all free. Sean in the past has typically set up like a tip jar where you could give him a little thank you for the effort, but you don't pay for these items at all. And there's stuff that would go for hundreds of dollars on eBay. And so again, for me, worth the trip to KansasFest alone just for this, let alone all the other great stuff. But I think what they found recently, and this is Sean, and I think James Littlejohn is also heavily involved with this. The guy who had the big green bus and now has the big green pickup of death. They found that they're getting less and less of these 1 and 2 off item donations, and they're getting more of people like, I have a garage full of Apple IIs and software and books, and can you come and bring a U-Haul van and take this all away? And that, so Sean and James and a couple of other people that have been helping out will road trip to wherever these are, load them up, and take it all away, and then offer it to KansasFest attendees. And like you said, it does cost quite a bit of money for gas and storage and organizing all of this and eating while you're on the road. And so yeah, I can't think of a better Apple II thing to donate to if you're looking to spend all the rest of your money after you've bought Plamen's amazing hardware.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's hard to overstate the value of this to the community. I mean, my first KansasFest, I walked away from the garage giveaway with a basically mint 2C Plus, and
nice.
I mean, I was floored by that. So it's big stuff, but also the little stuff. I mean, last year I really wanted an original Apple II Plus owner's manual, because in the back of it, it had a fold out of the complete schematic of the machine. And mine is in a garage, in another country somewhere, and so I wanted that schematic to just pull it apart and stick it on my wall, because I thought that'd be fun to have the Apple II Plus schematic, and it's hanging behind me right now because you go there and there's a stack of Apple II Plus manuals. So I don't feel bad about ripping one apart because there's 100 of them there, and B, I didn't have to go to another country and dig mine out of storage to do it. So just it's little stuff and big stuff, and sometimes there's really rare stuff there. This year there was a Cocoa 3, which I've recently learned is a very uncommon and very desirable Cocoa. So it's not even just Apple stuff. And sometimes you need an obscure cable. Someone was looking for a duodisc cable and they found one. So there's this is stuff that if you had to go and get it on eBay would cost you a lot of money and a lot of time to search it out. So these guys are doing an amazing service to the community. So if you've been to KansasFest or even are thinking about it, I think you have to donate to this GoFundMe. There's no better way to spend your money in the Apple II community, I think.
Yep. And just to be clear, this isn't some door fee or cover charge. You don't have to donate to benefit from this. You just have to be at KansasFest, and so obviously give what you can, give if you can, and don't feel bad if you can't.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so moving right along. So it looks like there's an Apple II connection to The Simpsons and Futurama. Tell us about that, Mike.
Yeah, so this is another one of those Apple II celebrity things that I've been noticing a bit of here and there lately. This one's a little bit more specific than some of the others that I've talked about recently. And actually, this interview is from 2008, so kind of old, but I had not seen it before. A couple of years back, David X. Cohen, I think his name is actually David S. Cohen, but there's another David S. Cohen already in the Writers Guild, so he had to pick a different name, and he put X in the middle of it. He was a writer-producer for The Simpsons for many years and went on to be the executive producer and co-creator of Futurama. And a few years back, I think he put a call out to the Apple II community to help him rescue a game that he had written. And I don't know how I stumbled upon this recently, but there's actually an interview where it's on The Guardian, where they ask him, what's your favorite piece of technology? And he says the Apple II. And the questions are all about his love of the Apple II. And, I even learned that something that I didn't know, that he and his friends created a cutting edge graphics programming language to facilitate development of video games for the Apple II.
That is really cool. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's see. Let's move along to GSOS. So recently we talked about the new sort of community effort to update GSOS, and 6.03 has recently been released, as we've talked about, but it looks like there might be a bug in it.
Yeah, a friend of the show, John Brooks, actually posted about this it's a follow-up to the System 603 announcement thread in ComSys Apple II. He says that he ran into a possible bug while running the install script for version 6.0.3, and it caused the install to fail halfway through and leaving the boot disk in an incomplete state. The problem, as he describes it, was that the root directory filled up partway through the install, which caused the installer to abort before completion. The installer copied a what's new file into root, which took the last unused directory entry. When the installer went to copy ProDOS or something important, the directory was full and aborted the install midway through. He does have a workaround, so if you encounter this problem, the workaround is that you boot off of a floppy and then consolidate all of the files at the root into subdirectories to make room for new files that the installer will be adding.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for passing that along. If anyone's trying to use 603, they might encounter that. All right. Well, I think that's it for news. So we've got one quick piece of woos to talk about.
Woos.
We like was, and we know you do too. It's was news. It's woos.
WAS is going to be in Kansas, it looks like. Not KansasFest, but Kansas at least. And you can get tickets to see him. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, you could get tickets. I don't know if they're still available. The website doesn't say. But WAS is going to be appearing at the Lead Center at KU in Lawrence, Kansas, which is just down the road from KansasFest itself. And in fact, when WAS was out at KansasFest in 2013, he and his wife stayed there because I think she has family in that area. Tickets are free to go see him. He will be there at 2 p.m. on November 20th, again at the Lead Center. There's a $5 service fee. And I imagine by now, that was a couple of weeks ago, that if they're not already completely out, then they're close. But you can get your ticket now by going to that's lied.ku.edu, or you can call them at 785-864-2787 if you're in the area. Their box office is open from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. And I always, take every opportunity that you can to see WAS speak. He's great. The stories are wonderful. He's a lot of fun. And the best part about this is that a lot of, I know he's appearing later on in the year, I think maybe in January actually of 2016, and tickets to see him at that presentation are $90. So if you can see him for free, awesome, you should do it.
Yeah, and if you get the chance, he's not getting any younger, and as he gets older, he'll probably start spending more and more time in Australia as his new home. So he's probably going to be less available for things like this. So see him while you can.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're going to just do a quick tech segment next.
Fasten your seat bits and warm up your soldering irons. It's time to talk tech.
Okay, so normally, obviously, Quinn introduces the segments and things like that, but today I get to because this is something that she did, and it's totally awesome. Quinn, talk about what you did to your poor Apple IIc Plus.
This was a fun little odyssey. I think, as many of us know, the Apple IIc Plus, for some strange reason, has a different beep. Every Apple II model, every 8-bit Apple II model at least, has the exact same characteristic 1 kilohertz tone. And in fact, if you look in the source code for that, for the Apple II ROMs, the comment on the beep says, "Make a glorious sound." So clearly WAS felt this was a glorious noise, and I think we all agree. But for some reason in the Apple IIc Plus, it makes a lower pitched sort of blonk noise and not the proper sprightly beep that we all know and love. And this has been driving me crazy, and I decided to sit down and fix it. So I will spare you the gory details because it was quite a long process, but I will link to a series of blog posts that I made on this topic. And but the short version of it is that I built a ROM burning and dumping tool, and I dumped the IIc Plus ROM, and then I traced the code. I disassembled it and then traced the code. And what I found was that the beep code is actually the same on the IIc and the IIc Plus. Of course, the IIc has the correct beep. What's different is there's a delay routine in the ROM that is shared by many systems. It's kind of the official delay routine. And what they did is they rewrote that in the IIc Plus because it's trying to be consistent regardless of the clock speed of the machine. And, because of course the 2C Plus can run at 4 megahertz as well as 1. And they use this trick where they force the machine down to 1 megahertz during this delay loop so that they can count cycles and have it come out roughly the same. They do this by actually pinging the printer port, of all things. When you do that, the accelerator forces itself down to 1 megahertz so that the serial ports will work. So in this delay loop, they ping the printer port, and just the way the code is written, the cycle counts end up being different. It has to do a lot more setup and so on than the 2C version does. And this delay routine also lives in a different ROM bank. So the 2C Plus has 2 ROM banks. There's 32K of ROM in it, but it still lives in 16K of address space. So they actually page flip back and forth while executing ROM code in the 2C Plus. And for some reason, they added like 12K of self-diagnostics. It's quite ridiculous. There's a lot of code in there that I don't think is necessary. But so one of the things they did is they moved this new, the ROM wait routine into the other bank. And so that means they have to switch back and forth for that as well. So there's all this extra setup involving the printer port and the bank switching and stuff. And the code ends up being quite a bit longer and quite a bit more complex. And the cycle count of it is quite different than the 2C version. So it tries to, over time, it sort of averages out to be about the same so that the, Apple 2C Plus is still compatible with everything. But it's just different enough that it makes the beep sound different. So after much experimentation, I ended up just writing a new copy of the beep routine with its own little delay that behaves exactly the same as the old one did. And I put it in a new section of ROM, and I jump over to that. So I burn new ROMs with that, and it works great. So I hope to possibly make this available in some way. It's probably, there's some legal issues here. The 2C Plus ROM code is still owned by Apple, so I can't distribute it. But, there might be something I can do along the lines of, bring your 2C Plus to KansasFest and I can, make you a new version of it or something like that. So we can figure that out. I might be able to do some sort of a patch if you have your ability to burn your own ROMs or something. But anyway, so that's the story on that. And I'll link to videos of all this and all of the source code and everything if you want to see how this was done and maybe even do it yourself.
I can't believe how wonderfully geeky that is, that you would spend that much time and effort to fix what basically amounts to a quarter of a second of audio.
Yeah, it was a tremendous amount of effort, actually. Several weeks of effort to do that. And if I had known how difficult that was actually going to be, I might not have done it. But I'm certainly glad I did, because it gives me a little smile every time I turn on my 2C Plus now and it makes the right noise.
Yeah. Yeah, that is just so cool. I'm smiling thinking about it. It's so great.
Fun stuff. All right, so I think the last thing we're going to do here on this show is a few corrections from previous episodes, which sadly is becoming a regular segment for us. Why don't you start?
It's the same people that we keep offending.
Yeah, we're really sorry, folks. We are trying. Start us off, Mike.
All right, so Antoine, of course, of Brutal Deluxe, wrote in and reminded us that there's actually a third Olivier. There's Olivier Gogel, who talking about something that Olivier Guinard, who lives in Seattle, something he did, but we attributed that to Olivier Gogel, and then we said Olivier Gogel was part of Brutal Deluxe, but he's not. That's actually Olivier Zordani. So we apologize to Brutal Deluxe, Antoine, and the Oliviers.
Yeah, we pretty much choked that in every possible way. And related to that, we also the other folks we keep offending are Antoine Vigneault and Peter Ferry. We had recently mixed up the attribution of the effort to crack Rastan a couple of months ago. Well, we did it again last month. We falsely attributed the discovery of the secret ending in Lady Tut to Antoine, and that was also Peter Ferry. So once again, Peter, we apologize for that. Peter has actually been doing a little bit of sort of 4 a.m. style stuff. He's been cracking software and disassembling it and so on, but without attributing it with any kind of crack screen, which is a really valuable service to be doing. And so he's doing a lot of thankless work and not getting any credit for it. So thank you for all of your efforts, Peter. And he also answered some of the questions we had about that secret Lady Tut ending. We were mystified as to why it had never been found and so on. So what Peter says is the previous cracked versions missed it probably because the crackers never actually finished the game. He says that level 4 actually looks like level 1, so they probably assumed it was looping and thought that was the whole game, and so their work was done. And he says that the other reason they probably didn't find it is it's actually encrypted as well. So those are the two reasons why the cracked versions probably never had it. And because all of us, let's be honest, played the cracked version, none of us knew it was there.
What?
Hence the hence the undiscoveredness of that ending. So thank you, Peter, for clarifying that and correcting our errors. We will be firing our research department once again.
All right, and finally today we have a correction from Charles Mangan. He wrote in and said, sorry to add another item to your segment of corrections and clarifications. I think that was a little bit of a backhanded compliment. But you jumped the gun a bit on some of my new offerings at Retro Connector. I'm still working on a few kinks in the conversion kit for the M0100 to USB mouse, so that's not available yet. Not to go into too much detail, but this is my first project to require both PCB layout and 3D printing, and adjustments to one part require changes to the other. That makes sense. He goes on to say, to increase confusion, I'm also holding off with the other adapters to connect a USB mouse to a 2C or 2E mouse card, and to connect a functioning M0100 to USB until I have all of them ready. The good news is I'll have them all ready by the time your next podcast comes out. And then he takes a moment to blackmail us. He says that you can rely on my shameless self-promotion to spam the community's Facebook and Usenet forums when they're available, unless you want to have me on the next episode to hawk my wares. So I think we might have to make that happen. Not this time, obviously, but certainly coming up soon.
For sure. Yeah, Charles is doing great stuff for the Apple II community, so we're happy to promote that. All right, well, that wraps up another episode of Open Apple. We hope that people appreciated our efforts to clean up the format a little bit, and we will continue to work on that. I guess until next month, thanks to everybody for listening.
And thanks to our guest or guests that joined us for the GEOS interview. We appreciate your time. Definitely some great information there. And again, we all love that application. And if you haven't checked it out, you should. And you can enjoy it in the meantime while you listen to the podcast. And we'll see you next month.
Bye, everyone.
Today on Computer Show, we talk about computer communities. I'm Gary Fabert, and I'm joined by Angela Dancy. She's president of the Stanford Computer Club. Now, Angela, why would you join a computer club?
Well, Gary, a computer club is where students go to connect with students who share their interest in the world of computers and to gain some valuable hands-on experience with the latest technologies.
Fascinating. I imagine that's also a great place to meet people.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of students go there and they're from all different backgrounds, but they connect with people who share their enthusiasm.
This is fascinating. It's definitely a community I would like to be a part of. Now, I believe that I have Thursday afternoons free. What time do you mean on Thursdays?
No, you can't join the club. It's for students.
Good. Okay.
This has been the Open Apple Podcast. Subscribe to us in iTunes or visit us at open-apple.net, where you can browse our extensive catalogue of past episodes or read our blog. If you like what you've heard today, or even if you didn't, your comments, questions or ideas are always welcome. Send them to feedback@open-apple.net.
I hope someday I get a tech support call from an aircraft carrier.